2. Okay, here we go.
I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right, guys. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sab's podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays and Fridays, and you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Rumble. And welcome back, guys. Matt, I see you in the background. Whenever you're ready, just give me a thumbs up and I'll go ahead and bring you in. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with my special guest, Matt Taibbi. Welcome back.
How are you doing, Sabrina?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Excellent. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How have you been? I don't know if you've heard like any the new like local news here from Massachusetts. I heard the other day that the Patriots just picked up
Zeke Elliott. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, of course. I would. I still watch the Boston sports news. That's the first thing I do every morning. Sadly, but
is it weird like being a Boston sports fan in New Jersey?
I hide it, and I try not to force it on my kids either. Although they're all sort of organically Red Sox fans, which is interesting. But yeah, no, in this part of the world, you can't admit it. My Red Sox hats have never been outside my house.
I know whenever I travel, if I wear like any Boston sports stuff, like I actually had someone come up to me in Chicago and they said, the Patriots, the most hated team in America. I was like, geez.
I know people they'll just start things with you, about that whole situation. People get very emotional about the Patriots, especially during that Brady period. It was ugly, but sadly that's over. So we're back to mediocrity now.
I know. Do you think? What do you think about like the Red Sox? Because I know like a month or two ago, people were saying, "Oh my God, the Red Sox are so bad," but it's still early, and I feel like I've heard that for the past couple of years. It's still early. I know they're rebuilding, but do you think that they still have a chance, or do you think they need a new coach?
I love the direction of the Red Sox. I'm one of the sort of build through the farm team types. I think the young guys, Bayo and Duran, even the catcher Connor Wong. I was a catcher my whole life, so I watched this kid and he's got a great arm. And baseball drives me crazy because the sport now is structured so that you basically automatically lose your star if you're not the Dodgers or the Yankees. And so you have to do this strategy where you bank on young players who come up. And I think they've done a good job with that. And I find that more exciting than paying $400 million for somebody and hoping they don't tear their ankle up. So
yeah, I hear you. What do you think about like and then we'll get into like the more heavy topics. But what do you think about like the Celtics? Because to me, sometimes it's kind of frustrating that they make it to the playoffs and they get there, like almost there. But for whatever reason, I feel like they'll play great all season. And then when we get into like the championship series, it seems like all of a sudden Jason Tatum can't make shots. You have to depend on the other players on the team. Do you think that's just nerves, or you think like he still needs more time to get there?
I mean, they're still young. It's kind of amazing how far they've come, in the first years in the league. But there's definitely a thing about in the playoffs, you need that one person who's an alpha who can score at the end of the game. And I grew up watching Celtics. I was actually never a Celtics fan when I was a kid. I was a embarrassingly a Houston Rockets fan. I was a big fan of Hakeem Olajuwon. And but my father was a big Celtics fan, so I used to go to the games all the time. And Bird was just such a killer, and you need to have that in the playoffs. You need to have that kind of personality who is maybe not the nicest person, but knows how to do things at the end of a game. And some of those guys have to learn how to be like that. I think LeBron was that kind of player who needed to learn it. I can't believe I'm talking about this, but what do you think? I'm curious to hear your opinion.
I think I would really like to see them win a championship game this year. It's really interesting. Like when we got Kyrie Irving, we were like, oh man, this is it. We're winning the championship this year. And then Kyrie was injured, but I felt like even after Kyrie was injured, I felt like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they played really hard against like Cleveland when LeBron was still with Cleveland. And I was like, wow, we actually may have a shot at this, without Kyrie. Then that next season when Kyrie came back, I was like, we're not playing as good. Now,
Yeah.
it was weird, but I think that I think I think they have to get it together when it comes to those playoff games. They really have to play just as strong as they do during the regular season. And that's why I said, I don't know what it is. Like I sat there the championship games and I was like, if I see Jason Tatum shoot one more brick, I'm going to scream. Like, these are easy shots. I can make these shots, Matt. I can make these shots. So for me, I'm just like, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I don't know. It's sad. I think they'll get there though. I mean, they've got the horses to do it, and assuming Porzingis' leg doesn't fall off, which is something I'm very worried about. He's an underrated player. I think he's kind of the type of person they needed. Was just a big dude who can get a bucket, and we'll see. But they're a fun team to watch. The game's obviously changed a lot, but they have exactly the right kinds of players to win. I think so. It should be cool to watch.
Awesome. So now I want to get into some of the more heavy heading topics. Last time you were here was right after the hearing when you testified in front of Congress in reference to the Twitter files. And then not too long after that, there was this report that the IRS came to your house apparently during that time when you were testifying. I want to hear a little bit more about that, or as much as you can discuss. Why do you believe that they showed up to your house? Do you feel that they had a legitimate reason to be there? Or do you feel like this was an intimidation tactic?
It's impossible to say what exactly it was. I wish I could say definitively one way or the other. When that first happened, I didn't say anything publicly because there were no indications as to whether it was random or whether it was somehow tied to whatever was going on. It seemed like an extraordinary coincidence, but hey, those things happen. So I did feel like ethically I had to inform the committee in case this was intimidation. It would have been irresponsible not to inform them that might be going on. They then made a very big deal out of it, and kind of bigger than I expected them to. It turned into this big national news story. And as a consequence of that, they ended up sending a letter where we got all this information about what actually happened. And at that point, that's when I got nervous because I saw the report, including there's one page that says open date for the investigation, and it's 12/24/22, which is a Saturday and Christmas Eve. And that was a day when I was putting probably the scariest of the Twitter files reports out. I was in a hotel room in San Francisco. Who in the IRS works on a Saturday on Christmas Eve? So that was weird. Then they were looking, to see if I had a carry permit. There was all kinds of stuff in there about, articles that I had written, things that I had said and that had been said about me, and that clearly had nothing to do with my revenue status or, what kind of work I did. That was unnerving. And then I found from other people who had gone through similar things that this is not an uncommon situation. So it did result, as you probably heard, after that, the Treasury Department announced that they're going to be curtailing those kinds of home visits, which sounds like it's tied to this incident. They didn't say it was political, but my sense is that it's a mighty big coincidence. But you can never say for sure.
100%. How do you feel about? I'm sure you saw the testimony that RFK Jr. gave about censorship in front of Congress as well. How do you feel about the way that he was treated? I know because you went through the experience. It seemed like to me like they wouldn't even allow him to speak about censorship. It's almost as though they were trying to censor him while he was testifying in front of them. How do you feel about the way that he was treated? And do you have any concerns in reference to if any of these government agencies, whether it's the IRS, et cetera, will try to target RFK Jr. in the future as well?
Yeah, I mean, watching that was amazing. It's funny because I was prepared for it to be weird, having gone through that exact situation. If you go back and look at the tape of Michael Schellenberger and I testifying, you'll see that there are multiple moments where we kind of look at each other with this half bemused, half horrified look on our faces. As spectators, it was really weird to be part of because these Democratic members were so unbelievably aggressive and not just insulting, but almost threatening. The optics of it were really strange, and I thought maybe I was missing something, that there was some element of this situation that I hadn't been briefed on, that they were crazy. But then when I watched the RFK hearing, it was even significantly worse than what we went through. That bizarre move with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, moving to try to take the entire hearing into executive session, basically saying this is sort of an exaggeration of Elon Musk's, speech not reach doctrine, saying like, oh, we're not going to shut down his speech. We're just going to make sure that nobody except us sees it. For them to not see that the optics of that were strange in a hearing that supposedly was about censorship tells you how crazy it's gotten on the Hill. And it does make you think. I think that a lot of the people who are involved in government now, they just don't have any sense of the sort of traditional concerns about civil liberties or any of those things. Some of them, I think, don't even know what those laws are, or don't know what's in the First Amendment, or don't know that you're supposed to give people due process. And so I wouldn't put it past them to do all kinds of things to RFK. We saw in the Twitter files that there were numerous attempts to try to get him removed from the internet. So yeah, I think anything can happen, which is unfortunate.
Very much so. I'm also curious in reference to that particular situation. It was interesting to me that they even allowed RFK Jr. to come testify because they've been so critical of him and they've been trying to silence him. His channel was removed from YouTube. I believe he's trying to implement a lawsuit against Google right now because of that, because he is a presidential candidate. And then there's also this issue where he is not being allowed to have Secret Service, which other presidential candidates have had and are allowed to have. It's almost as if they're trying to make sure that he will not be protected in any way, shape, or form. And I'm curious in reference to the censorship issue, now that this has kind of been on the world stage, so to speak, because of these hearings, there's been multiple hearings and the UFO hearings as well. Do you feel that more Americans, number one, are even paying attention to this or are waking up to just how much our government tries to silence us? And if they are, do you feel there'll be changes in reference to how people vote politically?
Well, I sure hope so. I started covering the internet censorship issue in 2018. You might remember after Alex Jones got taken down, there was this weird incident that they called the Purge, where a group of I think it was 811 Facebook accounts were just zapped. They just were just removed by Facebook, and this was done in consultation with the Atlantic Council, which the Senate had basically asked Facebook to work with, and they said that the problem was coordinated inauthentic activity. And I called up a bunch of these sites, and the legend is that this is all about conservatives, that they're the people who are being censored, or that it's conservatives and libertarians. The Purge, actually, those original accounts, there were a whole group of them that were actually either left-leaning or just sort of blandly democratic. There was a site called Reverb Press. There was another one called the Everlasting GOP Stoppers. There were lots of police brutality sites like Cop Watch and Cop Block. Police the Police was another one, Anti-Media. And, I called some of these folks, and they were... it was interesting. I had worked in alternative newspapers, as a younger person. So I was familiar with the phenomenon of putting all your money into a publishing organization and kind of self-publishing and making a go out of it. And that's what they were doing. These were mom and pop small businesses that were pouring, in some cases, $2,000 to $3,000 a week into Facebook ad boosting tools to try to build a business. And they had done that for years and were being successful. And suddenly it's just gone. It's, they took it away with no due process, no anything. And I thought that was horrible. But even worse was the reaction of colleagues and media. I started to tell these stories, and because this was happening at the time when everybody was worried about Russian bots and believed that was the cause of Trump getting elected, everybody I knew was like, who cares? It's nothing. Don't worry about it. And, from there, then there was the whole thing where Google changed its algorithm, and Truth Out and, the World Socialist website and all these sites lost their traffic because they changed the way they do the search returns. Nobody cared about that. One of the things I'm happy about is that the Twitter files, then that mixed with the Missouri v. Biden lawsuit, mixed with the hearings, mixed now with the Facebook files, has made this issue impossible to ignore. Everybody's cognizant of it. And instead of denying that it's happening, basically what people are saying is it's happening, but it has to happen. Like, it's necessary. And that's important, because now we're actually talking about what it is. Because I think most Americans instinctively find this repugnant. And once the issue gets in front of enough people, then there will be some kind of referendum on it. It could happen as quickly as this lawsuit, by the way, which could easily change the entire landscape, without even a vote in Congress, which would be very interesting.
It would be interesting. Why do you think that people are now, well, not everyone, but some people, particularly, I would say liberal outlets, now it's all of a sudden it's a right-wing talking point to be against censorship? Like, where did this come from? I felt like that was something that like Democrats or leftists or progressives were really passionate about, not censoring people. But now it's like, if you come out against censorship, whether it was you, whether it was Elon Musk, whether it's RFK Jr., now you're considered to be a right-wing. Where do you think that came from?
It's such a weird thing culturally, isn't it? Because, I grew up, that was the defining issue I always felt for somebody who was on the political left. Every one of the sort of famous political legends of liberalism had in some way to do with this issue, whether it was the ACLU defending Skokie, the Nazis in Skokie, whether the People versus Larry Flint, right? The Hustler magazine story, fighting against the restrictions against NWA, the Parents Music Resource Center case, the Mapplethorpe case, This is one controversy after another, and it was automatic that people on the left were in favor of free expression, understood the importance of it, understood why also. I mean, this is something that I think has been lost. The Skokie case, the Nazi case, the reasoning for that was so obvious, and they articulated it over and over again. They said that if we don't step in to allow these folks to march in Skokie, Illinois, the thing that will happen the next day is that every small southern town in America is going to disallow NAACP marches. The civil rights movement will not be allowed to go forward once small governments are allowed to control speech. And I thought that was sort of irrefutable logic. Now it's just not part of the way people think on the political left. I think they think that the deplatforming works, and that people like Donald Trump are such a threat that we have to use these tools. But the problem is the tools don't work, and more than that, it's just impossible to arbitrate what's true and what's false with accuracy, and that's the real big problem.
Right. And speaking of NWA, you notice they're doing this to Ice Cube too, again, because they did
Right.
it a couple years ago when he said, like, why do we have to vote for the Democratic Party if they're not giving us anything for our vote? And now you see they're coming after Ice Cube again. Like, now they want to suppress Ice Cube. They don't want him to talk. And he's been going on to different podcast shows. And I'm just like, do you guys remember who Ice Cube is? You remember what he told us? Remember what he said about the police? Like, he still feels very strongly about the police, but they don't want him to talk to certain people. So he had an interview recently with Tucker Carlson. People came after him for that. They came after him for saying, like, you don't have to vote for, Trump or Biden. You don't have to vote for the Democratic Party. And it just seems like a lot of people, I don't know if a lot of these accounts are just bots, but it seems like a lot of people are they're just confined into like this bubble where if you step outside of that bubble, you're seen to be a problem. And it's really weird to me.
Yeah, it's funny watching that whole phenomenon with Ice Cube. When I see that, I think of songs of his like "When Will They Shoot," right? Like, because he was always back in the day rapping about how somebody was going to come out and shut him up, right? Like, what if they had to use a gun to do it, they were going to do him like Malcolm, right? Like that's one of the things that he was always talking about. And back then it was because, they were rapping about the police or whatever the issue of the day was. But it's similar now. I mean, I think there's a same kind of vibe is in the air of if you step a little bit outside the lines, that we're going to have this enforcement mechanism that is really effective, and it's just odd to see it manifesting itself in the same way that we used to think of, people like Ed Meese or Falwell or whatever. Like, that's now the norm in Democratic Party politics, and it's just trippy to watch that.
How did you feel when you had the interview with Mehdi Hasan? And we watched it on here. I was so frustrated at Mehdi Hasan.
No, he got me. Look, I wasn't prepared, but anyway, go ahead. Yeah,
I was like, wow. But how did you feel like doing that, going into that interview? Because to me, it kind of felt like it didn't feel like it was an interview. I felt like he was interrogating you and you were, basically like in court. And I felt like you were being interrogated by Mehdi Hasan. Not only that, but some of the so-called errors that he pointed out, you were actually correct on. But it's almost like I felt like he didn't really give you the opportunity because he kept interrupting you. And then obviously it seemed like to me that his mic, he had a louder mic. Obviously he's in a mic'd up studio. So he was interrupting you, over talking you. And I was just like, looking back on it, would you do it again? Because for me, I think when I was watching this, I was like, no, Matt, don't do this interview.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't do it again. And that's too bad, because I actually believe that one of the reasons I did the interview is because I think part of this job is that you have to face your critics, and even if it's hostile and it's a drag, if you get through it, you're making a point that you're not afraid to listen to everything that people have to say about your reporting or pointing out flaws or whatever it is. And I had specifically criticized MSNBC quite a bit for refusing to talk about especially their Russia reporting. So I thought it would have been hypocritical for me not to go on. However, I'm not great on television, first of all. The other thing is I was not prepared. Usually I'm fine because the reporting is all nailed down. And in the worst case scenario, I can just say, okay, well, go read the piece if you have an issue. But here, I was surprised by something that I wasn't aware of. There were these issues in the piece. And as you note, some of the things I wasn't exactly... there was one that was an error, but it was a very inconsequential error, and I didn't pick up on the fact on the air that he was actually trying to make it into something that was much bigger than it seemed. One of the reasons the video looks so bad is because I'm kind of looking into the camera saying, oh yeah, I did write CIS instead of CISA or whatever it was, not realizing that to him, this was a big deal because now I was implicating an intelligence agency instead of an NGO. If I had understood that context, I probably would have fought back harder, but I didn't. And, that's the difference between a television professional and somebody like me. So it's too bad. It's unfortunate that it happened that way.
Did you think it was a coincidence or a strange coincidence, considering like after that interview, Stacey Plaskett, issued that statement where she basically wanted to try to get you for perjury? It almost kind of felt like the media and at least the committee members, it's almost like they were in on this together to try to like take you down.
Well, yeah, there was a straight line you could draw from Mehdi in tweeting to AOC retweeting Mehdi to, Stacey Plaskett basically repeating the sentiments of AOC. And, when I heard about the letter, it's really funny. I didn't even get the letter. That's one of the odder little twists of the whole situation, is that they were threatening me with jail, but I had to wait for Li Fong to obtain the document somehow. But at that point, I tweeted to Mehdi and I said, hey, come on now, like all jokes aside, you've made a mistake with this thing. Yes, I did have a typo, but we're not going to push this to the point where I'm going to be prosecuted and put in jail. I got kids, come on. And he didn't say anything, which I thought was kind of telling. I mean, it tells you how serious these folks are. They really mean it. They're not just... It's not performative, this whole thing, which I think is an important aspect to a lot of what's going on with this sort of drift towards authoritarianism. It's not for show. They mean it. They really want to push the envelope of what it means to have power and to threaten people. And, this is an example of that.
That's right. And speaking of having power, you wrote an article recently, which I think everyone needs to read this. It says Campaign 2024, not left versus right, but affluent versus everyone else. It says the realignment of major parties away from blue against red and towards a rich versus poor dynamic is America's most undercovered political story. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I do feel like this is where we're headed. And I feel like there are a lot of people that kind of like jump in whenever you bring up this issue about top versus bottom or rich versus poor. They will jump in as deflectors and try to bring it back to Donald Trump or try to bring it back to we could get the crazy far right and not comment on the issue of poor and affluent. And I don't know if you saw this video recently. There was a video went viral called Alabama Mama, where she just went on this rant talking about how it's basically this, affluent class now and everybody else is at the bottom, where the middle class has pretty much been wiped away. And I want to get your opinion about that, because I feel like heading into 2024, I'm seeing it again where a lot of people are focused on, you got to go vote for Biden because we don't want to get Donald Trump, not mentioning the fact that both of them are corporate and both of them are affluent. So either way, if you're poor or if you're working class, you're still going to lose. And it just seems like to me, you would think that the majority of Americans would get this by now, but I feel like there's a lot of people who still really believe we have to vote for one of these teams, whether it's red or blue. And I want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is something I've thought about for, I don't know, almost 20 years now. I've been covering presidential campaigns since 2004, and it's something we started to notice, I think, in 08, and then especially in 12, is this pretty dramatic change in the composition of the electorate. So just to take an example, if you go back to the year Clinton was elected in 1992, the most affluent congressional districts were somewhere between 60 and 65% likely to be Republican back then. So the top class sort of 1% voter was sometimes sort of self-interestedly voting for Republican politicians, either for tax reasons or because they were actually politically conservative or whatever. But in the period since then, the Democrats really stressed this idea of we're moving away from being backed by unions. We're going to vote for NAFTA. We're going to start competing for donations from Wall Street. We're going to help deregulate, allow the Citigroup merger, deregulate commodities trading, all of these things that led to the 2008 crash. And the Democratic Party, I think, basically left behind all of its class-based politics, moved to this paradigm where they campaigned almost entirely on social issues like, choice, which isn't bad. It just means that it's different, right? They were getting a different kind of voter. And now, Marcy Kaptur from Ohio, I put this in the piece I wrote. She put a chart up showing like the richest congressional districts in America and the poorest congressional districts in America. And you can see that on one side, it's almost all blue, and at the bottom, it's almost all red. And she was saying, how is it possible that the Republicans are representing the people who are struggling now? And that's the reason for that is that there's been this shift in how you predict who's going to vote for whom now. Income and education are the absolute predictors over and above almost anything. It used to be like, the abortion issue used to be reign supreme. That's really not the case anymore. Income and education almost signify almost completely. If you live in a very affluent suburb, almost everybody's a Democrat. And the problem with that is that it's left the kind of vanishing middle class voter that you refer to without any good choices. The only choices they had in 2016 that made sense were Bernie, but Bernie, of course, was not going to allow to be, become the Democratic nominee, or this furious nihilistic protest vote, which was Trump. And obviously they voted for him. And I think it's important to understand why, but this all has to do with money to me, and the fact that it's become so much harder for people at the lower end of the spectrum, and nobody will talk about it because nobody wants to admit that dynamic exists.
100%. Because one thing I've noticed over the years too, when we look at a lot of the coastal cities, these coastal states like California, Massachusetts, etc. This is pretty much where the Democratic Party kind of lives now. Like they rely on the coastal academic elite. Even when we look at an organization like DSA, they moved in that direction as well. Like I went to a DSA meeting one time and I was just like, everyone in this room, none of these people are working class,
right?
But they're championing these working class issues. But everyone in this room is pretty much like academic elite. And so I feel like the Democratic Party, they cater to that crowd now versus when Bill Clinton was in office and he really picked up the Rust Belt. He spoke to like the working class. He won states that Democrats would never win now. If you look at the electoral map, but I do feel like there seems to be, and this having lived in New England, for example, there seems to be this kind of elitist snobby attitude, especially if you've gone to one of the colleges here on the coast. Whereas, like, I went to Harvard, so I know this and I'm better than you. And
Mm.
you need to work harder, educate yourself. And that's why you don't understand these issues. And I've heard that type of rhetoric come from some of the most, proud, like liberal Democrat voters, where they will talk down to Trump supporters or people that are living in those red rural areas as if those people are beneath them, instead of trying to work together with them, talking down to the working class. And I think that can be a really big turnoff to a lot of people coming from those areas who are hard workers, but they didn't have the same opportunities that some people may have had who went to a school like Harvard, so to speak. So I've also seen a lot of these coastal cities go from working class to they're heavily gentrified, and it's now just for like professionals. I mean, Boston at one point was a working class city. That's not the
No,
case
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
today. And when these people are pushed out, like, where do they go?
There's an exodus of people who are moving to southern states, or they're leaving places like California to go to Texas, right? I mean, there's this sort of well-defined phenomenon that's happening. Some of it is sort of traditional white flight, but I think there's a new phenomenon on top of that that's political in the way that you're talking about. I started to worry about this after the 2008 crash. I remember going to a foreclosure court in Florida. They set up these sort of high-speed courts because they were foreclosing so many people they couldn't do it through the regular court system. So they brought these judges out of retirement, and they had these things called rocket dockets, where people basically would come in and they'd be thrown out of their houses within 3 minutes. And there was a line of people, and you could see they were white, black, Hispanic, poor, middle class, like there was a whole range of people that was politically diverse. And the rage in that room was, you could like cut it with a knife. It was unbelievable. And I thought, this is untenable. This is not going to last for long. This is going to come out somewhere, right? And I think that was part of what the seeds of the Trump movement were. I think the Occupy movement was correct when they identified this idea of the 1% versus the 99%, that there's a small minority of people who are doing great and everything makes sense to them, and then there's this sort of widening group of other people who have all kinds of complaints about all these different things. Some of them are working multiple jobs. Some of them, are navigating the ridiculous healthcare system that just makes no sense. And, bankruptcy is automatic if you get sick at a certain time. Like, there's so many reasons to be pissed right now. And they've been denied a real choice in how to deal with these problems. Because there's like basically a status quo party that doesn't do anything, and then the other choice they have is just this ineffectual, nihilistic protest vote. But even so, they're going to do that instead of vote for the status quo. So I think it's sad. I remember talking to Bernie after 2016 and him talking about how he had so much affection for the Democratic Party because when he was a kid, they fought for poor people, and that's why he would never leave the party. But it's not true anymore. I don't think you can say that. There aren't kids like that growing up who feel that way.
Right. Especially when we look at like income inequality. And I know people that they've left these more expensive cities and they've moved further south. Like they've moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, or Austin, Texas. But now, like, even those places are starting to become more expensive too, because they're having an influx of people coming in. So now it's like supply and demand, where all these people are coming in and you need more apartments. And they're like, oh, so we're going to increase the rent because the demand is high. And so the solution to this problem is not to tell people just move down south. And because I used to hear that a lot of people say just move down south. Florida's expensive now. This problem is, there needs to be some type of solution to this problem other than just move somewhere else because the place that you grew up in is unaffordable now. And I'm starting to see a repeat of what I saw after Obama. Like some of those people that voted for Donald Trump voted for Obama.
Oh
Some of
yeah.
them voted for Obama twice.
Yeah, and a lot of them came from these sort of formerly thriving, factory towns in Michigan or Ohio or Youngstown or Flint or places where there was a middle class once that maybe they weren't educated, but they could have one income and a family would be relatively secure. There's a lot of anger in those places, as you know, right? I mean, that's not a mystery. And I think there was a lot of belief that Barack Obama was going to come in and he talked the talk for sure in 2008. I believed it. He put distance between himself and Hillary Clinton. He essentially said that people are hurting out there and we have to do more, and said he was going to allow for instance, negotiation of Medicare prices right by the government or reimportation of drugs and all these things that sounded really great to ordinary people, like that mattered to them. And then he gets elected and nothing, right? So people are mad, and then they see Obama moving to Martha's Vineyard, which is like the absolute symbol of what you're talking about. Like, I remember Martha's Vineyard when I was a kid. It was a great place that was full of people who, maybe they were fishermen. There were a few rich people, of course, obviously, but you could live there if you were just an ordinary person. Now you have to basically, have be the Sultan of Brunei to have even a small house in Martha's Vineyard. And it's the symbol of this impenetrable upper class society that most people don't have access to. And seeing the former president move there and feel so happy about it, I think is upsetting to a lot of folks, right? And that probably triggers that move to somebody like Trump.
Right. And I'm not sure. Are you familiar with Jackson Hole, Wyoming?
Oh,
Matt?
yeah.
So
Similar
Jackson
thing.
Hole, exactly similar thing. It was a working class town for those who don't know. And then one day celebrities decided that it was a beautiful place and they should move there. So celebrities started buying houses in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And now the people who actually grew up there can't afford to live there because the celebrities came in. And so it's a constant problem. And that's why I'm saying, like, this is happening across the country. And I feel like someone who really gets that and understands that, Cornel West, for example, he's running third party. He's running through the Green Party. As you can imagine, he's already received a lot of hate from people because they're calling him a spoiler. How dare he run in the first place, but how dare he run outside of the Democratic Party? So the Democrats are really afraid that Cornel West is going to ruin things for them, so to speak. But at the same time, Cornel West, having seen what happened to Bernie Sanders and been a part of Bernie Sanders like campaigns.
And they're close friends. Yeah.
Exactly. He's like, I already know what they would do. So it does not make sense for me to run through the Democratic Party. When you see someone like him step up and come forward, because I told my audience, I was like, Cornel West does not have to do this. He can just retire and just chill on the beach. He doesn't have to run for president. To me, that kind of said that Dr. West sees that there's a sense of urgency and things really need to change. So to me, I kind of saw it as though he's taking it to that next level where Bernie Sanders wouldn't go. Bernie would not run outside of the Democratic Party. He wasn't willing to do that. What do you think about like a Cornel West campaign? And then we can get into your opinions about RFK and Marianne as well.
Well, it's funny that you bring this up because I, with my podcast co-host Walter Kern and we talked about Dr. West a lot last week. I remember during the Sanders runs, and I had a lot of friends who were either worked in the campaign or around the Sanders campaign. I was very interested in what was going to happen with that campaign. And there was this huge question that hovered over both of his runs. What do we do if we don't win right? What do we do with this huge amount of support that we've suddenly and unexpectedly amassed? And by the way, just to give you a sense of how unexpected this was for Bernie, Bernie had an early turnout at an event in Maine in his 2016 run, where they had so many people show up that they had to get a bigger venue. And Bernie thought this was the only time that was ever going to happen. He actually sent his staff to go get basically legal pads and try to go through the crowd and get everybody's addresses so that he wouldn't lose all of these track of all of these supporters. Like, he thought that was his one chance to get a big audience. They had no idea what was coming, that this was going to be this national phenomenon where they got 37% of the vote or whatever it was. So they didn't know what to do. And when the question presented themselves the first time, I think, it was harder for Bernie. It was actually, he came closer to actually protesting against the party, I think in part because he dislikes Hillary so much personally. They were always really nasty to him, the Clintons, and it was an open question to him whether he was going to defy her or campaign hard or whatever it was. But he got along well with Joe Biden. He had always been friends with him. Remember, Bernie had to move from the House to the Senate, and he needed to be kind of mentored by some folks there. And Joe was somebody who was always there for him. And it was hard for him to imagine this idea of, burning it all down and taking a hard line with the party and demanding that they do something. Well, it's not hard for Dr. West. Obviously, he's a very outspoken man. He knows exactly what he believes in. He operates out of principle, not out of politics. I think that's very clear. And he has no compunction whatsoever about dealing out, some discomfort and pain to the Democratic Party. And for all those folks who are calling him a spoiler candidate, remember, there's no such thing anymore. Anybody can win, right? Like, Donald Trump proved this. People thought it was mathematically impossible for somebody like that to win, or for Bernie, for that matter, to get as close as he did. The instant he gets over 6 or 7% in the polls, he becomes a major factor in this race, and he's almost there right now, isn't he? Cornel West. So I think his race is it's a major undercovered story right now, because nobody wants to deal with the reality of it. I mean, they're going to have to cover it at some point, but he's for real. And I think also Americans, when they listen to him talk, they're going to find that they like him a lot more than they expect to, because he sort of radiates sincerity, courage, principle. A lot of things that are sort of absent from modern politics are very evident in him, and they translate very well in this new environment. Sorry, I'm going on about this, but I just think his whole phenomenon is very interesting. So yeah, you're right to focus on that.
Yeah, I 100% agree, because I've been saying for a long time it would be great if we had someone that was going to run third party independent that was popular, that people knew. Like Jesse Ventura came close to that at one point for 2020. Now, like, oh, that would be great. A lot of people know who Jesse Ventura is. And now here we are. And I think just listening to like MSNBC, people like Simone Sanders, Chuck Todd, etc., they are very, very scared because it is Dr. West. And it's hard for them to criticize him the way that they could some of the other candidates, because Dr. West knows so many people and a lot of people like him. It's hard to like attack someone when you're interviewing them and they call you brother. And he says that to everyone, whether it's Fox News or whether it's, MSNBC or CNN. And I think they're really concerned about that. But what's weird to me is that they talk about this 2024 race as though it's just owed to Joe Biden. We should just give it to him because he's already sitting there, when Joe Biden's having difficulty talking, difficulty walking. And it's very clear that I don't think he has the mental capacity to be president again for another 4 years. But mainstream media, they have their talking points, particularly from the State Department, and they're just telling people, no, you're gonna go ahead and just pick him anyway because we say so. And I'm curious how you feel about that.
Yeah, I covered Biden a little bit in 2020, and I had one of the moments that was sort of changed my attitude about politics a little bit and journalism came when I watched a speech of his, and he, in the middle of it, clearly lost track of where he was, what he was talking about. It was very obvious that he was struggling with the basic process of campaigning, of figuring out what his affects should be. Like, he would sometimes give a speech, and when he was supposed to go soft, he would be rageful, and when it was supposed to be the opposite, he would do that. He was poking people in the chest. He was doing all these inappropriate things. I called up a psychiatrist who had been a source for a story about the idea that Donald Trump might need to be revoked according to the 25th Amendment. And Rolling Stone had asked me to do this story. I thought it was a little, kind of silly, but I did the story anyway, and he was very willing to talk about Donald Trump's mental problems in that interview. When I called this guy back about Joe Biden, he wouldn't talk on the record, and it was so totally dishonest, like this idea that here's somebody who's willing to violate this ethical code for this partisan reason, but you have somebody who might be president of the United States, who might be carrying the nuclear briefcase, and might really be demented, and they don't want to talk about that. It's just crazy, and they can't hide it anymore. It was very smart of them not to campaign for the rest of 2024, but now what are they going to do? They have 18 months left to go in this thing, or however long it is. That they can't hide it. And imagine him trying to debate somebody like Cornel West, or even trying to parry with him across the internet. West is so quick on his feet. He's so eloquent, and Biden can barely get through a sentence. It's embarrassing. And to watch all these people, defend it and just say, yeah, it's our duty to cast a vote for him. Why? Why is that the case? Why do we owe this person our vote? This person who, because he's got institutional authorities behind him, we can get new institutional authorities behind somebody else. I just don't understand that reasoning.
100%. And I'm curious what you think about RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson choosing to run through the Democratic Party to primary Joe Biden. We've already heard that the Democratic Party, or the DNC, has decided there are not going to be any Democrat primary debates, which I think is ridiculous. I think there should be debates, especially considering the way that they're polling. But how do you feel about that? Now, I've had this conversation with Marianne. I told her, you already been through this. You ran in 2020. You know what the DNC is like. They're not going to let you debate. They're just not going to even give you the super delegates if need be. They'll let you get a few to make it seem like they're legit. But we all know how this worked with Bernie 2 election cycles in a row. And then particularly also with RFK Jr., who is getting a lot of attention, a lot of press. But I think it would be very disappointing for the American people to not see all three of those people. And there may be more. There's rumblings of Joe Manchin, not see all three of those people actually have a Democrat primary debate. Do you think it's even worth their time? And do you think they should have a plan B when this is all done with?
Well, first of all, not allowing debates. What do you think the likely result of that is? It's just going to make more people support both of those candidates. They're going to be mad about that. And they're going to, it may affect the general election voting for Joe Biden. This idea, you're asking me to coddle the candidate because you think an incumbent president of the United States can't handle a debate, with these two figures. That doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. Both of those candidates are very interesting. I met Marianne in Iowa in the last cycle, and I was very impressed by her effect on the crowd. Like she seemed very interested in the topics that we were just talking about. This whole idea about, people who are on the wrong end of the stick and are fighting against a corporate system that doesn't work really for almost anybody anymore. And that was the theme that she went with, and I thought she was really eloquent about that. That kind of voice needs to be heard. RFK is he's someone who he has a lot of knowledge about a lot of topics. I disagree with him about a few things, but remember, his campaign manager is Dennis Kucinich, who is almost like the prophet of modern liberalism. I mean, all of the things that he ran on in 2004 and 2008, everybody said he was crazy, and now they're conventional politics in America, legalization of marijuana, even the trans issues. This is a guy who does know what it means to be poor. He grew up homeless and lived in a car, so it's a completely different sensibility than this, the kinds of candidates that they're putting forward, the DNC candidates. They need to be heard. They need to have that debate, but they can't have it because there's nothing they can run on. So they're going to do this thing where they shut these voices out and just hope and hold on for dear life and hope that they can get to the general election and beat somebody who may even be in prison by then. The fact that they're trailing in that general election is just, it should be such a wake-up call, but it's not. It's amazing.
I agree 100%. So one of the questions the question I have for the poll for people, I'll have to look at it later. But if RFK Jr., because he's polling higher than Marianne Williamson, if RFK Jr. does not win the Democratic primary, which I don't believe they will let him win, do you think if he were to change his position, let's say on Israel and Palestine, because that's where him and Dr. West fundamentally disagree, if he were to change his position on Israel and Palestine, do you think he should team up with Dr. West through the Green Party? How do you feel about that?
That's an interesting idea. I don't know if they would go for it. They have some issues they'd have to smooth over there that are not inconsequential, I think. But I'd be in favor of a third party run by RFK. He should do it because, look, if the Democratic Party is not going to fight fair, if they're going to do things like exclude people from debating or have the candidate not campaign, then sorry, you deserve a third party challenge that's going to take votes away from you. That's how politics works. If you want to do it the right way and give people a fair shot, and you still prevail, then you have the right to ask somebody like Bernie Sanders to campaign for you and get out of the way. But if you're going to be dirty about it, you got to expect that there are going to be consequences. And I think they should play hardball if that happens.
Well said. I'm also curious to hear your perspective about this. Let's say it does come down to Biden and Trump again, even though there's been multiple indictments against Donald Trump. I still think he's still in this race. He is still polling very high among the Republican primary challengers, and he continues to increase every time he gets a new indictment. It's just something that I've noticed. But if it comes down to Biden and Trump again, and then there's also Dr. West, that's the thing about running third party or independent, guys. You still get to be there at the end. Like, that's the thing. What do you think is going to happen? Do we get Trump again, or do you think Biden will win re-election?
Well, Biden has, as terrible as he is traditionally as a candidate, he does have this interesting ability to kind of retain sort of amorphously this base of support. That was an underreported story in 2020. He kept being dismissed over and over again because he was so terrible on the stump. And most of us campaign reporters are trained to think if somebody is awful on TV or if they make gaffes that they can't succeed. he does continue to maintain his numbers usually, although that has not been the case lately. Right now, it's going downward quickly now. But the direction of the Democratic Party support has not been positive. There was a trend that started in 2020 where they started to lose votes with Hispanic voters, black men. It was a small change in 2020, but it was noticeable enough to make some pollsters write a few things. And then women overall, oddly enough, right? But he lost tremendously with white men. But those trends have now been expanded, and they don't seem to be affected by his legal status. In fact, it seems like if he's in jail, that might actually help him somehow. And so, I could easily see a situation where it would be the most amazing reality show in history. He'd be, it'd be like the movie Shot Caller. He'd be sitting in the yard with a couple of Secret Service agents conducting the presidency, surrounded by cartons of Marlboros. It would be amazing to watch, but I think it could happen.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. I think that we're in a time, like, I can only imagine what the history books are going to look like like when we're older. Like, what are the history like textbooks going to look like for this time period, like of our lives? Because it's just so many things are happening. The fires right now that are happening in Hawaii, this is another thing that a lot of people are pointing out on social media. Joe Biden seems to be absent. He was at the beach yesterday, and I'm seeing videos of people in Hawaii saying that things are actually worse than what mainstream media is telling you. Where is the help? Where's the military? That they have this expensive, defense budget. Where's the National Guard? Where's all this help coming to people in Hawaii? And then at the same time, you see Joe Biden asking Congress for $24 billion for Ukraine.
Right. And this is one of the things that really killed George Bush. His presidency, I think, really took a sharp nosedive after Katrina for a couple of reasons. Because number one, it put the real state of American cities on television and how people lived. I mean, I was there. I remember thinking, wow, when people see this, they're going to do a double take if they've been watching sitcoms for their entire lives. And then the other thing is, the seeming kind of let them eat cake attitude about the whole thing that emanates from the White House in these situations. It just plays so badly, and they're doing it again. This idea of approving $200 million of aid yesterday for Ukraine, asking for billions more, but these problems in America, they're going to keep happening, and people they're not going to be happy about it. It's the same. It's a similar phenomenon. Sorry to go on, but it's similar to the bailouts in 2008. People got upset with Barack Obama because they thought, wow, we're doing terribly. Everybody's, millions of people are getting kicked out of their homes, and we're investing all of the national treasure into the people who caused the crisis. Where's our share? And that's where the anchor comes from. And these things build up. It's like one insult after another, and before you know it, you have a population that's got 9 or 10 different grievances, and you can never get them back. And that's why these moments are important.
Well said. I have 2 more questions for you, Matt. In reference to the media, because the media plays a big role in electoral politics and how a lot of Americans decide what they're going to do come election day. What do you feel is going to happen with mainstream media, particularly MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News, because their ratings have declined since Trump lost in 2020? And I think a lot of these commentators are well aware, and they know that it's kind of like their days are numbered. We watch CNN like switch different hosts and different time slots. They fired a couple of people, some for behavior reasons, but others just because of ratings issue. 10 years from now, Do you think that the majority of Americans are going to depend on mainstream media when it comes to electoral politics, and why or why not?
I don't think they really depend on them now, honestly. Uh, I, I think the end of that era was 2016, and I remember this because I was, again, I covered the campaign, every one of them from 2004 on, and I remember being on the bus with these reporters, and then not long ago, they were unbelievably arrogant. There was a sense in their group conversations that we can decide who gets to be called electable, who gets to be called fringe, who we're going to pick on, who we're going to give a hard time, right? So when Howard Dean came out and he was, against the Iraq War, 100 times a day they would ask him, "Are you too soft on defense? Are you too left?" That kind of thing. But with John Kerry, it was one softball after another. They would call Dennis Kucinich elfin, right? They would call Ron Paul fringe or loony. There was always some kind of descriptor that went with that. And they really reveled in the power that they had to signal to the public who you can vote for and who you can't vote for. And people like Mark Halperin, who is now sort of been canceled, but he talked about this thing called the Gang of 500, who were the 500 most important people in Washington who decided who got to be president and who didn't. And they were like all people in his Rolodex, basically. Well, that's gone now, right? Like Donald Trump steamrolled over that. He didn't need the media. He used Twitter to talk to the audience. And they can see now that their influence is waning really, really quickly, and they're furious about it. But instead of doing the logical thing, which is going and listening to people and finding out what their concerns are and just reporting it, which is the easy way to do it, they are circling wagons and finding new ways to insult the electorate, which is exactly the way to lose audience. I just think that they're going to end up giving that audience away to somebody else who understands the voters better.
Matt, these were two questions from the audience. Did you interview RFK? I thought at one point I saw something that said you were going to.
I talked to him briefly at Freedom Fest. I've talked to him a few times over the years, and I know Kucinich very well, so I'm in touch with the campaign a bit.
Okay, awesome. And the other question I had for you is, this is another one that people keep asking me, of all people, but I know you were writing a book at one point. People are wondering, number one, are you finished with the book? And two, if you are finished with the book, are you returning to Useful Idiots?
Ooh, I'm not finished with the book. I'm still writing it. Don't know when that will be finished, and I don't know about Useful Idiots. We'll have to see. But it turned. I've had about 4 or 5 stops and starts with the book project. The Twitter files kind of interrupted that whole thing. I was supposed to be writing about one thing, and now I'm kind of in this other place. So we'll see. I miss Katie. We do talk all the time, and we had a lot of fun doing the show. But it might happen. The thing I'm doing with Walter now is, I was a big fan of Spy Magazine as a kid, and we sort of geek out on things like books and all that, and it's a little bit less political, but maybe we'll see.
Are you gonna talk to Elon, or have you heard from Elon since all this went down?
No, I haven't talked to him since that whole thing happened. It's sad, but he's a complicated figure, and I think I'll leave it at that. It's funny. People throughout the Twitter files period, people were, calling me a lapdog for Elon Musk and all these things. I think they don't really understand the complicated nature of the relationship between a journalist and a source. You're sort of like a confidant, so it's unseemly to go out and say negative things about somebody who has, opened up to you and told you things in confidence and all that. It's sort of like, if a doctor were to start talking about a patient. So I'm in an awkward position with Musk. Like, I can't, there are things I can't say and I don't want to say because I want future sources to know that, whatever they tell me is going to stay between us. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, if you hear from him again, will you please tell him that if he's going to do Twitter spaces for presidential candidates, to do them for all of them?
Oh, yeah. Oh, he absolutely should. I mean, what can I say? He's got some unique tendencies, let's put it that way, and he likes who he likes. So it's unfortunate, but it's gonna go the way it goes.
It is what it is.
Yeah, as Bill Belichick would say.
I know. All right, Matt, thanks so much for hanging out.
Thanks so much, Sabrina. I appreciate it. And take care of New England for me. I appreciate it. And thanks for reaching out.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Right, bye-bye.
All right, guys. Hope you learned a lot there. That was Matt Taibbi. That was the second time on the show. Great to always hear from him. He's a wealth of information there. If you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button. That helps me out there with the algo. I'll go to a couple comments. We'll show the thumbnail so you'll see what else we're going to discuss tonight. Some interesting stories tonight. And then we'll go into our first news story. I'll go ahead and start with that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Oh, hell to the no. They part on reparations, single payer, Israel, Palestine. One is a capitalist, the other is a socialist. One is anti-war, the other, it depends. I used to watch Matt's dad, Mike, growing up. This is CBS Evening News with Mike Taibbi. Also, an endearing quality that could serve West in blue-collar country is his deeply religious roots that runs big there, despite it pissing off Black radicals. Well, thank you so much for that, Roger. Thank you. JB says, hello, all. I'm itching to hear the details of this Michael Oher blindside story. Make sure to like the stream. Forehead kisses. Thanks so much, JB. Thank you, Peter. Shiva, backdoor portal. Yes, I know. I talked about Shiva. Dr. Shiva will be here not next week, but not next week, but the following week. He'll be here. Thank you, Ivan. There's a big naval base, Coast Guard, and Marine base in Oher. Oahu? I'm not sure. They can be deployed to help very quickly. Thank you for that. And thank you for the super sticker, Top JJ. Thank you. All right, guys. Yes, we do have a lot to discuss. Let's go ahead and share that thumbnail, and I'll show patrons as well, because you have to hear the stories tonight. Tonight, we are discussing, of course, Matt Taibbi was just here. We're also going to discuss Cornel West and RFK Jr. I don't know why I said J. RFK Jr. unity. That's in reference to that poll and some of these clips I'm going to show you that happened recently. We're also going to discuss this crazy story that happened in Kansas City, Kansas, the Kansas City cop raid in reference to this newspaper outlet. This is crazy. We're going to get into that story, and we're going to discuss the Blind Side lawsuit. If you haven't seen that movie, you should definitely watch it, especially considering what we're going to discuss tonight. And I actually have a bonus story, which is a local story here in Massachusetts in reference to something that they're going to be doing for every child here in the state, which I think is great news. And I think we should have this across the country, not just in Massachusetts and Minnesota. Quick shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you so much for your support. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators. There's also Sabsters, Sabbies, and of course, members. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. And I want to give a special shout out to everyone who is a new Sabby patron. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for Jim Phillips, the illustrative carp. That's an interesting name. And Alex Fox. Whoop, whoop. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on around here. And speaking of likes, Kansas City, Kansas, not Missouri, just want to be clear, had an interesting incident that happened the other day in reference to a newspaper outlet that most of you probably have never heard of. And I say this because the police decided to raid the Kansas City newspaper. This is a wild story. We're going to start with this clip here from ABC News, and then I have more details to tell you about what happened after that raid in reference to one of the co-owners. Let's dive into it.
Tonight, ABC News has obtained video of police raiding a small-town Kansas newspaper. The incident raising First Amendment questions. At issue, a tip a reporter received about a story the paper never published. Authorities are defending the raid. Tonight, the newspaper says its 98-year-old co-owner died one day after the raid because of the stress she suffered. More now from ABC's Faith Abube.
Snap a picture of that password right there.
Tonight, ABC News has obtained dramatic news surveillance video of a small-town Kansas police force raiding the newsroom of the Marion County Record, now the heart of a battle over the First Amendment.
You can afford to hire a lawyer, one will be appointed to represent you.
Officers reading a reporter her rights, snapping photographs, and taking away computers.
It's everything you've ever heard in the third world. It really is like we're living in Stalinist Russia or Nazi Germany or Vladimir Putin's Russia.
Eric Meyer co-owns the paper with his 98-year-old mother, whose home of 70 years, he says, was also raided Friday. He tells ABC News she died on Saturday, one day after the raid, saying she was too stressed to sleep or eat.
That is absolutely crazy. I want to jump in here for just a second and explain. Do you guys see what's happening here? Why is law enforcement interfering with the press? And I don't care how big this newspaper outlet is. I don't care if it has like 10 readers. I don't care. The fact that the police can come into a newspaper facility, take files from that outlet, take pictures, they raided the place. Now, we've talked about this often before about the censorship issue. We've talked about the free press issue in reference to social media platforms and the government intervening. So the FBI, the CIA, etc. But we didn't talk about law enforcement actually interfering when it comes to censorship, free press, etc. This is a whole different ball game because they have a badge, they have handcuffs. They can lock you up. Now we're looking at the possibility of reporters possibly being detained for doing their job. You guys see how far this is going now? Let me let him continue.
Spent 8 hours a week working for us, putting together a column of memories. How dare they take the last day of her life and make her filled with fear and anger.
At issue, Meyer says, is a tip one of his reporters received about a local business owner accused of driving illegally. They decided not to publish the story.
We notified the police that they'd told us this. They never responded. The person who was the target of this then falsely accused us of illegally obtaining the information.
That prompted a search warrant, though federal laws protect journalists from search and seizures and instead require a subpoena. But the chief of the Marion Police Department says in a statement, there are exceptions, like, quote, when there is reason to believe the journalist is taking part in the underlying wrongdoing.
Let's pause here for a second and let's focus on this statement. One of the exceptions, when there is reason to believe the journalist is taking part in the underlying wrongdoing. According to who? This can be a very dangerous precedent. I hope things work out in reference to the journalist here in Kansas. But if it does not, I want to talk about this story, even though I know it's a little small local story, because I want to show you what can happen to other journalists across this country. if other law enforcement decide to use this same statement to apply it to journalists that they believe is involved in underlying wrongdoing, this could be a huge problem. This is why we continue to say you need to free Julian Assange. You see, now these things are happening to people that are just at local newspaper outlets. How many people actually are reading Marion County Record? How many people read this? But they don't care. They don't want the information being released, period. So this is a dangerous precedent. One law enforcement agency may look at this statement and say, oh, we don't really believe there was any underlying wrongdoing. But another one could disagree. Who defines what the wrongdoing is? And who's the one that decides, let's go in and raid that outlet, that newspaper outlet? Let's continue.
The paper denies any wrongdoing and says it won't be deterred.
If they think I'm going to give up because they've made it difficult for us to put out a newspaper for 1 week, they've got another thing coming.
In a statement, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation says it has joined an investigation into allegations of illegal access and dissemination of confidential criminal justice information. The KBI says it did not take out those search warrants, was not present when they were served, and believes very strongly that freedom of the press is a vanguard of American democracy. Lindsay.
Here we go. Here we go again. Freedom of the press. Again, you can't talk about this without thinking about people like Julian Assange. You just can't. And that's why when people say that's not a big issue, don't talk about it. You see what's happening now? Why in the world would law enforcement go after a tiny newspaper outlet? This is how scary it has become for the press. For the press. Now, I want to go into another clip here that focuses a little bit more in reference to the co-owner died because she couldn't tolerate the stress. They didn't just raid that newspaper office. They also raided her home. Can you imagine being 98 years old and the police just break down the door, come in and just raid your house? For what? Because of a story that you reported that they don't think should have been released? Let's dive into this clip here. This is where we're headed at, guys.
All right, a police raid on a small town newspaper is raising eyebrows and questions about press freedom and power of the police. But now one of the co-owners of the paper is dead, and her son is blaming the tactics of law enforcement. So here's what we know about this. Authorities in Kansas raided the offices of the Marion County Record, seizing reporters' computers and phones. They also raided the homes of the paper's co-owners, one of whom, 98-year-old Joan Meyer, died one day later. Now, her son, Eric Meyer, says he blames the stress and the trauma brought on by police. We should note that we have reached out to the police department for response. We have not yet heard back. Now, Eric Meyer joins us live now. Eric, I'm so sorry for your loss, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Natasha. Appreciate it.
I know that you believe that the stress of the raids contributed to your mother's death. Can you tell us how she reacted to everything as it unfolded?
Well, it's not just me. It was also the coroner who visited her house after the death. She's 98 years old. She's in fairly good health for a 98-year-old. And police knock at her door, and they stand there for a couple hours, as she said, just watching me. Why are they watching me like I'm some common criminal? And they waited for apparently the police chief to show up to search the premises. And she spent the rest of the day being concerned about this, as I think anybody would. When you're 98 years old and you've lived in this house for 70 years, they actually moved there the day before I was born, and I'm 69 with a birthday coming up. So she basically had her world invaded. And the fact that she says, where are all the good people who will prevent this? Why is this happening? The people used to respect information. They would never think about doing something like this. Now the past 50 years of her life working at the newspaper and co-owning it with me, she felt like everything was worthless. Everything had gone away. She muttered during the night. She wouldn't eat her dinner. She wouldn't eat breakfast. She wouldn't sleep. She sat up most of the night, muttering things like, "This is going to be the death of me." I tried to calm her down and say, I think maybe good will come out of this in the end, that something will be exposed and we'll be able to advance out of it. And she says to me, "I'll be dead by then."
And here we are. And what I have to say is this should be a warning sign to everyone. If they're willing to go after a small town newspaper outlet, what's stopping them from coming after you? Where's the push? Everyone in this town right now should be pushing to demand that the police chief is fired. Everyone, especially considering the police don't want to comment in reference to this particular story. Everyone should demand that he's fired right now. This threatens free press. I don't care if law enforcement agreed with what they reported or not. Is that really their decision to make? Where's the lawyers? If I was him, he should lawyer up. Probably sue the police department. It's such a dangerous precedent. I continue to say that because who's next? Who's next? Let's continue.
And sure enough, about 2:00, I was asking her if she wanted to eat something and take her pills. And she says, "I'm not feeling very well. I don't know that I," and died right in the middle of a sentence.
I'm so sorry. What did the coroner say to you when they arrived?
Oh, the coroner had been her primary care physician for many, many years and had seen her recently in the hospital. And I asked him, I said, I didn't say it quite in these terms, but I said, I think the police chief killed her just now. And he says, "I'm certain that the stress of all this was a major contributing factor." She didn't have a cardiac history. She didn't have, other than high blood pressure, but she wasn't somebody who was that fragile. She was a fighter who felt frustrated that she would be so pleased by the outpouring of support that the newspaper has received from people around the nation, around the world, since this happened, that would please her. I just wish she had a chance to see that.
I have two more quick questions for you. Did police
1 second, I want to add in something here because I think it's just incredibly important to mention. I hope more people do cover this story, but I just want to point out to you another reason why local politics is incredibly important. These local, even these small town stories, it's incredibly important that people hear what's going on because it's not uncommon that it'll start somewhere small first before it happens in a larger area or it spreads. I was just watching, actually, I just finished watching Painkiller on Netflix. And then I started watching Dopesick on Hulu. And it brought back, issues with the opioid pandemic. That's what it's about. And it just goes to show you how something can start in a small town or a rural area that a lot of people just not really paying attention to the issue because it's not happening in a big city or a metropolitan area. And it just is kind of ignored. Then years later, you hear the same issue continuing to happen, but now more people are starting to hear about it because it's happening in places that have larger populations. That's why this story is incredibly important because this is something that can easily just be swept under the rug. And people just say, "Oh, who cares? It's Kansas. No one's paying attention." But it's scary. It has to be scary to anyone who's a journalist, especially if you're an independent journalist. Are you hearing this? Remember when the FBI and the DOJ came after the Huru movement? Remember when they arrested the Black socialist? When they came after Amali Yeshitela and detained him? Well, now you have local law enforcement coming after journalists, reporters, media. These are especially dangerous times. Who's to say, especially if you're watching and you're a journalist, who's to say local law enforcement isn't going to knock on your door? Let's continue to her two questions.
Please tell you why they were searching your homes and offices, and how would you describe their conduct?
Their conduct was okay, I guess. They told us only that we had a search warrant that alleged that we had committed identity theft and improper use of a computer. I was looking at the warrant. They didn't say how, because what really had happened was we'd gotten a document from a source, and we were attempting to verify the accuracy of that document. It turned out that it was a bunch of arguing in a divorce case, so we decided not to use it. But we notified the police at the time that someone had this document and gave it to us. We weren't sure whether they were authorized to have it. We'd verified that it was real, and there were also allegations that the police were allowing the target of this to drive illegally. She'd apparently not had a license for more than 14 years. We reported that to the police and offered to give them assistance if they thought there was some case that they wanted to investigate. We never heard back from them. A week later, they raided our office.
Well, and police say that once the details of this case come to light, that people will see they are justified. What do you have to say to that?
You really believe that? Isn't that what everybody says? There are no other details. We know what we did. Why did they raid the vice mayor's house? Not only do we know what we did, the vice mayor knows what we did, and the person whose identity was supposedly stolen knows what we did. She figured it out. She figured out that her husband had obtained this report and given it to a source who gave it to us, and she admitted that to me 4 days before the raid. If all we did was check it out to make sure that the document was in fact a legitimate document, had no intention of disseminating, which is the restriction on that. If we are guilty of identity theft, so is Marion Police Officer Zach Hudlin, who was the other person who accessed it. Why, when we verified on a public site, we verified the accuracy of the document, why would we have given our own name? I mean, are we the world's stupidest hackers? No, we're not. And why would we have notified the police? They wouldn't even have known about it if we hadn't notified them of it.
Okay, Eric Meyer, I'm sorry again for the loss of your mother. I do appreciate your time today. Thank you.
This is all just incredibly crazy. Now, you know, of course, the police, for the most part, they're going to try to make sure that they cover themselves, right? So I want to go into this a little bit here. This article, a Central Kansas police force sparked a firestorm by raiding a newspaper and the publisher's home. So again, publisher and newspaper. Again, I want to bring back the issue of Julian Assange. Remember, they tried to call Julian Assange a hacker. Julian Assange was a publisher. So what happened to Julian Assange, even though it didn't happen to him in this country, we're starting to see some of these same tactics being used towards people here in the United States, even if it's done by someone else like local law enforcement, going after the publisher's home. And I want to go to this particular part right here. A search warrant tied Friday morning raids led by Marion Police Chief Gideon Cody to a dispute between the newspaper and a local restaurant owner, Carrie Newell. She is accusing the newspaper of invading her privacy and illegally, assessing information about her and her driving record, and suggested that the newspaper targeted her after she threw Meyer and a reporter out of the restaurant during a political event. First of all, in reference to driving record, particularly if you're a reporter, that's easy to get. You don't have to, pretend to be anybody else. Like, I don't understand how that's considered to be, an invading privacy. Like, driving records are easy to get. And suggested that the newspaper targeted her after she threw Meyer out of the restaurant. Okay. While Meyer saw Newell's complaints, which he said were untrue, as prompting the raids, he also believes the newspaper's aggressive coverage of local politics and issues played a role. He said the newspaper was examining Cody's past work with the Kansas City, Missouri police as well. So I wanted to point that out to you to show you, obviously, it wasn't just about the complaint that they received. Obviously, there was more to that story. Such a mess. I bet you they probably didn't think that story would get much attention. It was like, it's Kansas. No one's going to talk about this. We have to protect the press, you guys. Whether you agree with what they're saying or not, we have to protect free press in this country. Let me go to some of the comments here. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Yes and Miller. Danny Haifong is in the house. Just got here. Don't think RFK Jr. would make it past nomination process, given his positions on most things, to be honest. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Matt. Criminalizing journalism. There you go. JB says, if they can go after them, they can go after us in independent media. That's why this is so important. Exactly. No one's immune from this. Thank you, Delthea. Why would LEOs raid a small newspaper to build precedent to raid bigger papers, TV stations, magazines, etc.? There you go. Oftentimes, these things start small and then it spreads. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Pass the story on to people, you guys. I want more people to know about this story. Thank you for the tip, Roger. Joe said he owes us his presidency to Black people. Here's how he wishes to repay us. The title of this article by Truth Out. New Jersey activists want a ban on private prisons. Now Biden wants to reverse it. The Biden administration is backing Core Civic in lawsuit against New Jersey law, banning contracts with private prisons. And thank you so much for that, Roger. He says, please put in the chat. Eric, if you can copy and paste that and put it in the chat. Thank you so much. Crazy times we're living in, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for the super sticker, P. Smith. Protect free press. The next story that we're going to cover is a little bit different from what I typically cover on this show, but it's important because I don't like people being played or people being used. Some of you may remember the movie The Blind Side. The story pictured the Toohey family, pretty upper middle class family. It was based on a true story. That movie displays the Toohey family adopting Michael Oher, who at the time was a teenager, taking him in and uplifting him out of poverty, so to speak. Michael Oher later on becomes a professional football player. Now, The Blind Side is based on a true story of the Toohey family and retired football player Michael Oher. Sandra Bullock actually went on to win an Academy Award for her portrayal of Mrs. Toohey. It's a really touching movie. It makes you feel good inside when you watch it. You get all the feels, warm and fuzzies. But since the movie The Blind Side has been released, Michael Oher oftentimes has criticized the movie, even going as far as saying that is not him in the movie. So the character of Michael Oher in the movie, the real Michael Oher says that's not how it happened. He's been criticizing this for quite some time. But recently, Michael Oher filed a lawsuit saying that he was never adopted by the Tooheys. Now, for those of you who don't remember, I just want to show the picture up here for the peeps in the back. This is Michael Oher, the real Michael Oher, when he played for the Ravens. He's now retired. And this is the character Michael Oher. I keep wanting to say Michael Oher in the movie The Blind Side. And this is Sandra Bullock, who played Mrs. Toohey in the movie. This lawsuit was just announced in reference to Michael Oher is raising a lot of red flags and eyeballs. And when you see what Michael Oher is claiming that the Tooheys really did, I don't think you're going to like this. It turns out, according to him, the Tooheys actually never adopted him. even though they continued to say that they did, and the movie said that they did. Instead of adopting him, according to Michael Oher, they actually tricked him into signing into a conservatorship, not an adoption. Let's go ahead and get into this article here, and then we're going to go to the clip. Blindside subject Oher alleges Tuohy's made millions off of a lie. So that's the real Michael Oher. I'm going to make this bigger. Retired NFL star Michael Oher, whose supposed adoption out of grinding poverty by a wealthy white family was immortalized in the 2009 movie The Blind Side, petitioned a Tennessee court Monday with allegations that a central element of the story was a lie concocted by the family to enrich itself at his expense. The 14-page petition filed in Shelby County, Tennessee probate court alleges that Sean and Leanne Tuohy, who took Oher into their home as a high school student, never adopted him. Now, this is huge because this is a central theme of the movie. This has been a central theme of the Tuohys telling their story as well. Let's continue. Instead, less than 3 months after Oher turned 18 in 2004, the petition says the couple tricked him into signing a document making them his conservators, which gave them legal authority to make business deals in his name, including the movie The Blind Side, which, by the way, from what I understand, he didn't receive any royalties from, but they did. Let's continue. The petition further alleges that the Tuohys used their power as conservators to strike a deal that paid them and their 2 birth children millions of dollars in royalties from an Oscar-winning film that earned more than $300 million, while Michael Oher got nothing for a story that would not have existed without him. In the years since, the Tuohys have continued calling the 37-year-old Oher their adopted son and have used that assertion to promote their foundation, as well as Leanne Tuohy's work as an author and motivational speaker. The lie of Michael's adoption is one upon which co-conservators Leanne Tuohy and Sean Tuohy have enriched themselves at the expense of their ward, the undersigned Michael Oher, the legal filing says. Michael Oher discovered this lie to his chagrin and embarrassment in February of 2023, when he learned that the conservatorship to which he consented on the basis that doing so would make him a member of the Tuohy family, in fact, provided him no familial relationship with the Tuohys. Let me interrupt here for just a second. Some people may see this as a sports story or a Hollywood story and not really their thing. But what's important about this story is the fact that you had an upper middle class family that took advantage of a poor Black kid. And Michael Oher came from poverty. Getting him to sign something and having him believe that this is adoption, when in fact it made them his conservators. They were allowed to make money off of his name, and he didn't receive anything. And according to this article, he didn't even find out about this until February 2023. So that's this year. That's why he says it's embarrassment, because all this time he didn't even realize. He's a kid. Did he even know what he was signing? Let's continue here, and then we're going to go to a clip with the actual Tuohy family. The Tuohy family did not immediately return phone calls Monday to numbers listed for them. Their attorney, Steve Faris, declined comment to ESPN Monday, saying the family would file a legal response to the allegations in the coming weeks. Sean Tuohy told the Daily Memphian website that he was stunned by Oher's allegations and said the Tuohys did not make any money off the movie, only a share of proceeds from Michael Lewis' book, which was the foundation for the film. We're devastated, Sean Tuohy told the outlet. It's upsetting to think we would make money off of any of our children, but we're going to love Michael at 37, just like we loved him when he was 16. And here is a picture here of the cover of the movie for The Blind Side. Oher's petition is asking the court to end the Tuohys' conservatorship and to issue an injunction barring them from using his name and likeness. It also seeks a full accounting to the money the Tuohys earned using Oher's name and to have the couple pay him his fair share of profits, as well as unspecified compensatory and punitive damages. Since at least August 2004, conservatives have allowed Michael specifically and the public generally to believe that conservators adopted Michael and have used that untruth to gain financial advantages for themselves and the foundations for which they own or which they exercise control. All monies made in said manner should, in all conscience and equity, be disorged and paid over to the said ward Michael Oher. Oher was a rising high school senior when he signed the conservatorship papers, and he has written that the Tuohys told him that there was essentially no difference between adoption and conservatorship. They explained to me that it pretty much means the exact same thing as adoptive parents, but that the laws were just written in a way that took my age into account. Oher wrote in his 2011 best-selling memoir, I Beat the Odds. This part is important. There are some important legal distinctions. If Oher had been adopted by the Tuohys, he would have been a legal member of their family, and he would have retained power to handle his own financial affairs. Under the conservatorship, Oher surrendered that authority to the Tuohys, even though he was a legal adult with known physical and psychological disabilities. Physical and psychological disabilities. The petition alleges that the Tuohys began negotiating a movie deal about their relationship with Oher shortly after the 2006 release of the book, The Blind Side: Evolution of a Game, which chronicled the story. According to the legal filing, the movie paid the Tuohys and their two birth children over $225,000 plus 2.5% of the film's defined net proceeds. The movie became a critically acclaimed blockbuster, reportedly grossing more than $300 million at the box office and tens of millions of dollars more in video home sales. The film received an Oscar nomination for Best Picture, and Sandra Bullock won a Best Actress trophy for her portrayal of Leanne Tuohy. While the deal allowed the Tuohys to profit from the film, the petition alleges a separate 2007 contract purportedly signed by Oher appears to give away the 20th Century Fox Studios the life rights to his story without any payment whatsoever. So he received nothing. The filing says Oher has no recollection of signing that contract, and even if he did, no one explained its implications to him. And there's a picture of Michael Oher there with Leanne Tuohy, the real Leanne Tuohy, who you're about to see in an interview in just a second. And I want to say this before we dive in here. Michael Oher came from, if I remember correctly, single mom. His mom was not doing well to care for him. This is not to say that the Tuohys never did help him. What it is to say is that according to this information that has been released, especially this lawsuit that's happening, they took advantage of him. Let's see a time when the Tuohys were pretty proud of their time with Michael. Blindside family, real story. So this is the real Tuohys.
Right. I mean, you know, the true meaning that we want people to know is, you know, it's great to write a check. Everyone needs money. The financial need is there. But you know what? It's more important to give of your time and of yourself and of your talents. That's what makes a difference. Michael's life necessarily wouldn't have been changed if we just wrote a check. He needed our time and our attention, and that's what kids need. And there's kids falling through the cracks of this society every single day, and they need our time. And if you just look right beside you, get off the main street, get off the beaten path. There's Michael Orr's right 4 blocks from us. And you know what? He almost fell through the cracks of society, and he is now a starting tackle in the NFL, extremely smart. Who knows what's out there?
And that you profited off of. When this movie came out and when people heard the real story, it was kind of seen as this successful, wealthy white couple saved this poor black boy. Let's continue.
In the entire country now knows his story, now knows your story, and this is really giving you an opportunity to share this message on a much wider stage.
You couldn't have said it better, and that's, you know, obviously this isn't something that we...
Here comes the book. You guys see how it works? Here comes the book. First the movie, then people want to see who are the real Tuohys. Oh, we're the real Tuohys. We'll write a book. You can find out more about us when you buy our book. Here comes the book. So here comes the money from the book, plus the royalties from the film.
Requested, or probably even won, but it's something that we feel that we're in possession of and we have to do it. And people have been so wonderful to really get on board. I mean, you just can't imagine the letters we get on a daily basis. And it isn't people asking for things, it's people telling us what they're doing. And I think that's what the movie did. And I think that's what Michael's life has proven to people, that, you know, because you couldn't have been further down than he was. And I don't know if you can be higher than he is now. And so the gap is what really interested people. And that's kind of what we said, you know.
I just want to say something here. We're going to scoot past that. The gentleman that played Mr. Tuohy, Sean Tuohy in the movie, is Tim McGraw. This guy don't look anything like Tim McGraw. So that was a far stretch there. But God, this just really makes me feel so, just some kind of way. You know, it just sharing love with boy in need.
No. I suppose what difference it would end up making, and
if we wouldn't have done it probably.
Well, has it changed your life a lot since the movie?
Oh, that's a stupid question. That's why I tell people to ask that. That is a stupid question.
Why is that a stupid question? It's the question everybody wants to know the answer
to. Sandra Bullock played you in a movie, and she won an Oscar, and you know, and everything that happened in her personal life, and then she adopts an African American precious baby. Yes, it changes your life and your whole family's life. So, yes.
So apparently, of course, their life changes if Sandra Bullock plays you in a movie, like, obviously. But you notice what she said after that? Oh, and then after that, she went on to adopt a real life, you know, an African-American baby in real life. As if Sandra Bullock got that idea because of them.
We spend Fridays in Central Park with George Stephanopoulos. No, nothing's changed.
Nothing. But you have gotten pretty close to Sandra, right? You met Louis?
Yes, I've spent time.
She stole him.
He's the precious.
She did.
You guys see this? So yeah, we got to spend time with Sandra Bullock, and we got to hang out with her son, Louis. Oh yes, he's so precious.
You wanted to raise another baby.
We spent time with Tim and Faith. Everyone associated with this movie, with this book. Sally Jenkins, who wrote this book. We never knew Sally before this. She's a member of our family now. I mean, we love these people. I mean, it's just, we have had nothing but a pleasurable journey since this started. And we're just lucky and blessed that it's turned out that way.
So did you give Sandra any advice on how to raise an adopted son?
No, she gives me advice how to raise my 3 children on a daily basis.
You see, even in this interview, they're still going with, he was adopted. I Googled, I haven't seen any response from Sandra Bullock yet. But I wonder how she feels about this story that came out.
He wants to take him to the acting side. I'm trying to get him on the football field.
Already?
So we're conflicting a little bit.
They're actually truly fighting over how we're going to raise
We have a little
Louis.
bit of a conflict there.
Well, you guys, you are going to be facing an empty nest soon. Collins is out of college. SJ's almost done.
Yeah, he's a junior in high school, yeah. So we got a couple more years, thank goodness. But
adopt again?
We're leaving the door wherever God takes us.
We didn't go out to adopt. We get a lot of credit for that, which is great. Keep giving us that. But truth is, I tease people. We weren't really happy with the two we had. We sure weren't going after another one. But
yeah, you weren't going after another child to adopt. But when you got one, you found a way to make money off of them. And I think that's the problem. I don't know what to say except for this is a very troubling reality. Very troubling. Oh, and trust, if he's filed a lawsuit, he has proof that what he signed was a conservatorship. Why would they do that? Can you believe that? Did you guys know that he didn't make any money off that movie? But they did. When someone has a conservatorship over you, depending on what's in that document, if you look back to the conservatorship that was over Britney Spears, like they pretty much can own your name, your image, and your likeness. They can make money off of your name and your image. You think Michael Oher at that age, a teenager, knew that's what he was signing away? Was there a lawyer present when he signed these papers? Did they explain to him what he was signing? Was a lawyer present? And if there was, did the lawyer explain to him, this is what you are signing? But that's what's happening with Michael Oher and The Blind Side. So I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. We'll continue to follow the story. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Dana. Thank you for the super sticker, Giovanni. Red 6 says, in the movie, they made Michael seem dumb and aloof, almost like he was mentally challenged. That was another thing that people pushed back against. That's why one of the statements that he made was like, that's not me, like after that movie was released. And thank you, Delthea. It was mighty white of the Tuohys to save that poor black child from the evils of his own money. What'd I tell you? Where he says they had a response to his lawsuit via their lawyer today, Sabby Sabs. I'll have to check that out. Ouch. Ouch, ouch, ouch. I'm a little shiny. Right here. It was so humid today. I hate when I get the shiny spot like right there. Sorry, guys. Anywho, let's move on to the next story. This is a good news story. Get pumped up and get excited because I want this to happen in your state too, not just in Massachusetts and not in another state that it happened in that I'm going to show you. But big things happened here in Massachusetts. I did tell you guys that we did pass the millionaire wealth tax here in Massachusetts back in November as part of a ballot measure. Well, then the next step was, well, what do you do with that extra money that you have coming in now from the millionaires who really weren't paying their fair share here to begin with? Well, it turns out what you do is you make it so that every kid in this state can have free lunch. Check this out. Feel good story for you. One for the books, ladies and gentlemen.
The pain of hunger can make learning much harder, which is why Massachusetts is joining a small group of states signing on to a universal free school meal program.
It's a big relief, especially for families. Nobody wants to see a child go hungry. And unfortunately, for some of our children, that could be the only meal that they receive during the day.
Governor Maura Healey signing the state's budget Wednesday, approving funding for that program.
so their bellies won't be grumbling in their schools while they're trying to get work done.
The state effort is estimated to save families $1,200 per student per year.
Enjoy your lunch.
An issue that goes far beyond state borders. More than 9 million children still faced hunger in 2021. A popular pandemic-era federal program meant to address this made free school meals available to all children, regardless of family income.
There is
Oh, and by the way, a lot of money comes into the state, FYI. A lot of money comes into Massachusetts. And we have, I think last time I checked, we had over 300,000 millionaires in Massachusetts. So yeah.
that sense of pride as a parent or as a guardian, what have you, that you don't want people to know that you're struggling. To see this all happen and watch us collectively go through this financial crisis, this pandemic, watching people struggle, it's extremely heartbreaking.
But funding dried up last year, meaning it's up to each state or individual school districts to figure out what to do next. There are campaigns in more than 20 states across the country pushing for universal free school meals. But Massachusetts is only the 8th state to get the plan across the finish line.
I'm going to pause here so you can see which states actually have it already. California, Colorado, New Mexico. I feel like Colorado is always in everything. Sorry, California, Colorado, New Mexico, Minnesota, Michigan, Vermont, and Maine. And here comes in Massachusetts as 8th. And then it looks like these are the green states are other proposals in reference to free lunch. And it also takes away the stigma for the students that qualify for free lunch or reduced lunch. It takes that stigma away when that child's in line to get their lunch. It's like when they don't have to pull out their lunch money or, those types of things. Like there is a certain stigma with that. So if you just give free school lunch to all of the students, then they don't have that, that hindrance on them.
We know that when kids are hungry, they can't focus, they can't concentrate, they can't learn. And so by making sure that every child in this country is in class, well-nourished and ready to learn, will have a huge impact on the economy, on kids' outcomes.
Now, Allison, some states temporarily extended these free meals after the federal funds ended, but many of them did not. And student debt for their meals immediately started climbing, leaving districts to try to figure out what to do next. Some of them sending these to collection agencies, others even punishing the students, making them sit out activities due to this. The Food Research Council, by the way, through all of this says their polling shows that nationally there's 63% support for making these federal universal free meal programs permanent.
Another thing I was going to add to is, yes, unfortunately, some students that have a student lunch debt or whatever, it can be embarrassing depending on the school. They've actually punished those students because their parents are late on their school lunch. And so, like I said, there's a lot of stigma that goes along with it.
Allison?
Stephen Romo, thank you.
Awesome. Now, I want to show you something else in reference to this and then we'll go back into the Massachusetts thing. Minnesota actually did this. I talked about it briefly on this show, but the governor of Minnesota apparently is very well liked among the kids and everybody there in Minnesota, apparently. But he actually had no hesitancy in reference to giving all those kids in Minnesota free lunch. In fact, you need to look it up and see all of the things that Minnesota actually passed last year that a lot of people are just not talking about. This is why I have that section on my YouTube channel that says, the ballot measure results. So you can go to each state and you can see what they passed in November. That's very important. People need to see what's happening on the local level. But we want to give a shout out here to Governor Tim Walz because he was the one that signed that free school meals free school meals bill into law. Here we go.
Those of us that have spent some time and understand that the lunchroom for breakfast or lunch, while certainly a place for nutrition, certainly a place to make sure that we had enough to eat before we went to school, was more than that. It was a place to be with our peers. It was a place to socialize. It was a place to relax for students, a place to feel good, to laugh, to tell jokes. That's what the lunchroom is supposed to be. This bill today is making sure that every student can partake in all of those things. One, having enough food when they get to school, making sure that it's not a concern, but also making sure there's no stigma attached to understanding that sometimes food insecurity is a lot closer to us than we think. If this were easy, it would have been done a long time ago, because I'll guarantee you the vast majority of Minnesotans agree that making sure every child has a full stomach when they come to school is something that they want. It is now law.
Yeah, so that was signed into law. Now, Tim Walz is good on that issue, not so much on other issues. Let's just put that there, especially in reference to line 3. Not good on that issue, obviously. But for people who want a little bit more of a dive in, Massachusetts passed a 4% millionaire's tax last year. Now, every public school student will access free lunch. And there's the cafeteria lady there. Lunch lady land. Sloppy Joe, sloppy Joe. That's a reference to SNL, guys. Like, I don't know if you guys watched the SNL season where they had, it was Adam Sandler and Chris Farley and all those guys. Like, that's my favorite SNL cast, by the way. But they had this song called Sloppy Joe. Anyway, it goes on to say, Massachusetts passed a 4% tax on people's income above $1 million a year. Revenue from the new income tax is earmarked for public school meals. Massachusetts is the 8th state to expand its free school lunch program since a pandemic-era federal program ended. Public school students in Massachusetts are set to get free lunch and breakfast thanks to a new 4% tax on people's earnings above $1 million. Massachusetts in 2022 voted for a constitutional amendment to tax high earners. It went into effect at the beginning of 2023. State House News Service and Independent Newswire reported that $1 billion of the state's record $56.2 billion fiscal budget for 2024 will be funded by its new 4% tax. Governor Maura Healey signed the budget on Wednesday, making Massachusetts the 8th state to adopt it. The outlet reported that a portion of the $1 billion expected to be gathered from the new income tax would be used to provide all public school students in Massachusetts with free breakfast and lunch if they want it. So if you don't want it, you don't have to do it. If you still want to bring your lunch, you can still bring your lunch if you do that. But obviously, most of the kids, especially the ones that were on reduced lunch or whatever, most of the kids are probably going to take the free lunch. WCVB reported that state lawmakers agreed to allocate $523 million of anticipated revenue from the new tax on education and set aside $477 million for transportation. In February, President Joe Biden urged lawmakers to pass his billionaire tax proposal, which would impose a minimum of 20% tax on households with a net worth of more than $100 million. Let me comment on this for just a second. See the difference between direct democracy and indirect democracy? Direct democracy is having ballot measures on the ballot, and you, the voter, get to vote for what you want in reference to those measures. Indirect democracy is you, the voter, voting for a candidate and hoping that if they win, they are going to fulfill those campaign promises in reference to certain policies that you supported. And usually, indirect democracy doesn't really work. It's not working out for us. Okay? Unlike Massachusetts' new tax, which is on income, the proposed billionaire's tax is aimed at wealth. And that's the important piece. Wealth. Jared Bernstein, a member of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, told CNBC the proposal would target big corporations and the wealthiest Americans while protecting people who made less than $400,000 a year from tax increases. Biden also signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law in February, which included a 15% minimum tax on corporations earning more than $1 billion. So there you go. So shout out to my state. But it can happen for you too. If it happened to me, it can happen for you. Trailer Park Boys. Look that up on Netflix. Thank you so much for the super chat, Funky Lollipop. Michael was blindsided. That's true. Razor Sharp says, Sabby, get some of that new AOC sunscreen. Can you tell look, I went to the Jazz Fest and I did not have on any type of sunscreen. And yes, everybody should wear sunscreen. Just FYI. I didn't think it was going to be that hot. I didn't think the sun was going to be. Anyway, the sun got me right here. Right here. And you can't see the back, thank goodness. Because right here it's peeling in the back, but I'm not going to show you all that. Oh, no. Leviticus, we had free lunch 20 years ago when I was in school. You guys see, like, some of these things that people are calling radical or, like revolutionary. It's not that radical when you talk to people who had this before. Robert says, yep, ballot measures are king. Shout out to Aspen Fallen. Thank you for the super chat. Governor Walz was a teacher at my high school. Not the best governor, but this makes me happy. And shout out to Joey Peltier from the Peltier Kids. Says, F Governor Walz. I'm sure that's in reference to line 3. Yeah, he sucked on that. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric, and we'll dive into our next story. Thank you so much for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Regarding your last story, it looks like the government in the form of the police want to use probable cause against the media to go around the Fourth Amendment the same way they use it against Black people when it comes to telling us to get out of the car. Bingo! That's where they're headed, guys. All right, so our final story tonight is Cornel West and RFK Jr. Unity. And if you haven't had a chance to do so, don't forget to answer that poll because that question is in reference to this story. So recently, RFK Jr. and Cornel West obviously have been getting a lot of flack from mainstream media, not even just in reference to their policies, but in reference to them running at all. Honestly, questions like, why are you here? Or statements from mainstream media like, we've already given this to Joe Biden. Those kind of things. I want to start off by showing you 2 different interviews. One interview of Cornel West with Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. Smith is a sports commentator. I first heard about him from a show called First Take on ESPN, so he's well known in the sports world. But he also has his own podcast. The second interview I'm going to show you is RFK Jr. with Tucker Carlson. So you're going to see a piece from both. And then I'm going to try to pull this all together and make a point. And that point could be, especially considering RFK Jr.'s most recent tweet about Cornel West, is it possible that there could be some type of unity between the two? Now, that's given the consideration that RFK Jr. is going to change his position on Israel and Palestine after this conversation with Max Blumenthal, which I showed you in that interview, a new one. He said he's supposed to be talking to him in a couple of weeks, although according to Max's tweet the other day, Max says that's not what he was told, but we'll see. But if he has this conversation with people like Max and he changes his position on that issue, there's some other things I think he would need to change too. But let's say he did, and he loses the Democrat primary. Should RFK Jr. team up with Cornel West, and should they run together? That's the question on the poll. Let's get into the interview here with Cornel West and Stephen A. Smith. I want to play a piece of this first, where Stephen A. Smith is actually, in so many ways, basically saying to Cornel West, why would you run right now, given the fact that the people are so divided? And I want you to hear Cornel West's response to this question, because I think it's a good response.
In all sincerity, why now? Because I know it's been bad, but there's a level of hopelessness that I think has infiltrated politics in such a way that I've never seen in my lifetime. I'm 55 years of age. I've never seen it like this. Even when we saw People like yourself, obviously you were born before me, and because of that, you were living in the midst of the civil rights era. You saw unfairness, you saw degradation, you saw a lot of heinous and insidious things taking place in our country. But for some reason, no matter what trials and tribulations this nation or a segment of our populace was enduring, Dr. West, there was always hope. I look at the divide right now, and truth doesn't matter. It's what I want. Whatever it is that I want, that's all that matters. There's no compromise. Compromise is not a priority. Truth is not a priority. And that begs the question, why run now when hopelessness seems to have pervaded the proverbial proceedings?
Now, I feel like Stephen A. Smith basically answered his own question. He should run now because of the hopelessness, because people have given up, because people see that there seems to be no win with either one of these parties for the American people. There's win for corporations and for the MIC, but not for the people, especially if you're poor, you're working class. So I felt like he kind of answered his own question. But listen to what Cornel West says.
Well, I think that's a powerful reason for running, because keep in mind, I'm running for truth and justice. I mean, the presidency happens to be just a vehicle and a vessel for it. But right when the moment is at its dimmest and grimmest is the time when you have to try to cast your light in the form of your witness and your work. And in the same way to you in your own context, you got to bear witness. You got to cast your light. And most importantly, be yourself and be true to those who loved you. All the love poured into you, all the love poured into me, all the integrity poured into me by Irene and Clifton West, Shiloh Baptist West, Black Panther Party, all of my different friends. And I have friends that come from different ideological and political perspectives. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't look for political agreement. I think of a brother like James Brown. You know, James Brown, one of the greatest,
of course,
journalists of our day.
That's right. Yes, I do. I know him personally. He's a mentor and a friend. He's one of the great human beings you'll ever meet on this earth.
That's precisely it. You know, he was my roommate at Harvard.
Wow.
And you know, I go to him both for prayer, advice, insight. We don't begin by talking about politics. We begin by talking about our family. His mother was a gem and a jewel, Mrs. Brown, just beyond language, just like my mother. But you see, those are the kind of relationships that's gone into shaping one. Mm-hmm. And when you have that kind of blessing or those kinds of blessings in your life, then by the time you get into politics and you see what you see in politics, hatred, greed, revenge, manipulation, people saying anything just in order to win, people finding out what their deepest convictions are by checking what the polls are, changing their views overnight. Hey, what happened to truth? What happened to justice? What happened to integrity, honesty, decency? What happened to generosity? What happened to humility and fallibility? I don't mind telling folk I got gangster and thug in me, because I do, but I'm trying to be better. I don't mind telling folk I don't have the full truth, because I want to learn and listen. I'm a jazz man, just like this brother right here, Coltrane. You learn how to listen. You learn how to allow others to raise their voices. But most importantly, brother, you learn how to take a stand. You're not spineless. You're not just going with the flow.
What about people that...
That's a good point. So the point that I wanted to make there with that comment from Dr. West is the fact that Stephen A. Smith basically is just like, do it when it's easy. Don't do it when it's difficult. Don't do it when people don't have hope. Don't do it when the country is divided. Don't do it when, what if people listen to that type of rhetoric during the civil rights movement? Don't do it right now, Dr. King. The country is divided, and the country was divided then. Really divided. Don't do it now. Don't you do that march on Washington. The country is divided. People have lost hope. What if Dr. King listened to that? What if all the other civil rights activists listened to that? What if Fred Hampton listened to that? What if Malcolm X listened to that? You see the problem with where we have gone as a society, when we have gotten to the point where people only want you to really push or fight for something when it's easy. That's where we are now. Don't do it when it's tough. Too hard. Too difficult. People might get angry. Think about that. And this next question here, and then we'll go on to the RFK one.
Look at Dr. Cornel West. and they say to themselves, you are a black man, highly educated, far more knowledgeable than most of us. I know I've learned so much from just listening to you. I watch you every chance that I get when you're doing interviews with various people because it's just edifying, to be quite honest with you. And they look at you and they say, you know so much, and you talk about everyone on an equal playing scale, as opposed to speaking about, okay, black folks are at a disadvantage. And when you talk about it from that perspective, it's appreciated. When you talk about other folks who have suffered, some people have said, Dr. Cornel West, what about us? What about us? What about us? What do you say to that, particularly in this day and age when we're witnessing the times that we're witnessing in, and the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the college admissions issue with the Supreme Court, and race being omitted as a consideration, and all of these other things that people point to, and they look at you and they feel like you're supposed to take a different position than you have taken. How do you respond to that?
In other words, Stephen A. Smith is basically saying that Dr. West should mainly focus on black issues and only black issues. That's really what Stephen A. Smith is saying. Dr. West speaks to the pain and suffering of different groups. He doesn't omit the pain and suffering of black people. We talked about that on the show. Obviously, he's pro reparations. He's talked about that. That's part of his platform. But he also talks about the pain and suffering of the Palestinians, the pain and suffering of working class people in general and poor people, the pain and suffering of people who have all this tremendous debt that they still carrying around, medical debt, college debt. He speaks to all different types of pain and suffering. But what Stephen A. Smith is basically saying and trying to go around it in a roundabout way, how come you just not mainly focusing on black issues and that's it? Not thinking about the fact that race is class and class is race. So race and class are intertwined. Now, that does not mean that there aren't certain issues that are only really affect black people. But when you talk about, when you say the working class, and then you say black people as though that's separate, it's not separate. We are the working class. The majority of us are the working class. So that's what people like someone like Stephen has to understand. Now, he'll say all that, and people will say all of this to Cornel West, but then they'll still go vote for Joe Biden, who's not speaking on any of those issues. That's what kills me. So let me let him answer this.
Well, one is, though, brother, you can't talk about integrity for me unless you talk about moral consistency.
Yes, sir.
Now, I'm also a revolutionary Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus of Nazareth. What does that mean? That means that
all people,
everybody has the same significance. They're made in the image of a great God. I don't care what color you are, what gender, what sexual orientation. I don't care what national identity you are from. You have the equal status and significance. So I'm trying to love everybody, but I begin on the chocolate side of town. How come? Because my mama and daddy were chocolate. They shaped me. Love thy neighbor as thyself. I couldn't even begin to love myself without acknowledging those who love me, that taught me what love is all about. But that love is not going to stay just on the chocolate side of town. No, my white brothers and sisters are suffering. I'm in solidarity with them. I want to do everything I can to alleviate it. If my indigenous brothers and sisters, if my Spanish speaking, if my Latino, if Lithuanians, if Ethiopians, Ukrainians, across the board, Russians, across the board, it's a human thing. You see what I mean? It's profoundly human. It really is.
Let me go to this. You initially ran under the People's Party, and you.
Okay, and then they get into that, which we've already covered. I've already covered that on the show like multiple times. So now we're going to go into the RFK Jr. interview with Tucker Carlson, and I'm going to show you how these two are connected. Now, we're going to dive right into the issue of the Secret Service and RFK Jr. Listen to this.
Bobby Kennedy Jr., thank you for joining us. So I noticed when you showed up, you've been on the road for weeks, you had no Secret Service with you, which is a little weird given that your father was murdered while running for president, as you now are. Why wouldn't you have Secret Service protection?
Well, I did do a tweet on that got 30 million views when we got rejected. We applied in May for Secret Service protection. Secret Service protection was only allocated to the nominees of the parties prior to 1968. But when my father was killed, they changed the law immediately, and all of the people who were running against him, including George Wallace, immediately got Secret Service protection. So the law says that you're entitled to Secret Service protection automatically 100 days out. But the president also has discretion to give Secret Service protection to any candidate for any reason. And there are criteria, which is that you have to have 15% of polling results for a limited period of time. But he even can overrule that. For example, President Obama was given Secret Service protection 441 days out, or 551 days out, even though he had only, I think, 5% support at that time. My Uncle Teddy was given Secret Service protection 450 days out, even though he had not even declared for his presidency. And so he and Carter hated each other. President Carter was, the president of his own party, and Teddy had been enormously critical of him. And personally, they had a very personal antipathy for one another. And Teddy ended up running against him.
I want to pause here for a second, because one of the reasons that people have been saying that they believe they're not giving RFK Jr. a Secret Service is because he's primarying a sitting Democrat. But actually, he just debunked that reason, because if Teddy Kennedy was given Secret Service when he primary challenged Jimmy Carter, that just goes to show you that's not the reason. So let's continue.
But when he was moving into that decision to run, Carter, in a very classy move, gave him Secret Service protection. We applied for it. I get a lot of threats, a lot of death threats, and I get, a lot of people who are, for example, about 2 weeks ago, a mentally ill person made it to the second story of my house, and that is a very, very common occurrence.
Inside your house?
Yeah, inside my house. Before, somebody who was working there stopped them and then called the police. And we gave the Secret Service a 67, in fact, Gavin DeBecker, who you've had on this show,
yes,
who's runs the premier security service in the world, put together a 67-page report, which included 28 pages of all the threats of, typical threats against me and other indicia that I should have Secret Service protection. And I assumed the president would give it to me because, it just seems like bad judgment not to give it to me. If you go even on my Twitter feed, probably one out of, every 30 or 40 comments says, oh, you're going to get killed or something like that. It takes notice of the peculiar threats to my family members who are in this business. So it's something that, the average American is aware of.
Yeah, your name is Robert F. Kennedy.
Yeah. And so it was an odd decision. I got a letter. Gavin actually got the letter because he had been doing, and by the way, I want to say this, the Secret Service themselves were wonderful. They were very, very encouraging, and they were very helpful at every step along the way. And I believe, and I can't speak for them, but I believe that their assumption was that we were going to get Secret Service protection. In fact, they told Gavin, we're going to send somebody out there within 10 days to interview Cheryl and Bobby and to tell them what it's going to look like. Because there's a lot of questions about, do I go to the gym? Do I have them, all of these questions that I don't know the answers to. And they come and they have a standard process for informing you. But then they went dark. And they said, a decision is made very quickly within 14 days, is what they told us. And they said, we have 8 details standing by ready to go. So we can do this very quickly. And then they went dark. And for 88 days, we didn't hear from him. And then I got the letter from Mayorkas, Alexander Mayorkas, who's the director of DHS, saying that we've determined that you don't need Secret Service protection.
Okay, so you guys heard that part there, that they basically told RFK Jr. that they determined that he doesn't need Secret Service protection. I don't know if Cornel West has asked for Secret Service protection or not. He'll be here next week, so he'll be back on the show. I'll ask him when he comes back on. But this is a very, very telling sign. First, you have Stephen A. Smith basically in so many words saying to Cornel West, why are you running, man? Like, why are you doing this? You think this is a good idea? Like that kind of thing. And then you have RFK Jr. being denied Secret Service request, which appears that he did request. And I'm going to go to this next question here from Tucker, and then we're going to go on to the critics.
It's very obvious, and you've confirmed it, that there are threats against your life, against your family. That's known. And so if they deny you protection and they know that, what message are they sending?
That they really want you gone. That's the message they're sending. They want him gone. They don't want either one of them in this race.
I don't really know what they're doing. And by the way, you know, we've looked, and there's a guy called Jeremy Hammond who's done a really good article, a really thorough article about the past. And he was not able, and we were not able to find a single presidential candidate who had requested protection from the president and was not given protection. You know, Herman Cain got it, I think, 500 days out. Jesse Jackson, Shirley Chisholm, George Bush, and Ronald Reagan got it something 500 or 600 days out when they first ran. So it's just standard operating procedure. And particularly people who are polling around anywhere over 15%, which I have been for 4 or 5 months now, are, you know, regarded as, it's been treated as pro forma. And I am the outlier. I'm the single outlier that we could find that was denied Secret Service protection.
Why do you think that is?
Okay, and I'm not going to play all of this. You want to watch the full interview. It's episode 16, RFK Jr. explains Ukraine, etc. I'm not going to read everything on here. You can find it on Twitter. Tucker Show is now on Twitter. But you see, everybody got it except for him, right? And I don't even agree with some of RFK Jr.'s like policies, but they're trying to send a message. And it's not just obviously the Democratic Party, but it's also mainstream media. I want to show you something. I haven't watched these women in a long time because they really just irk my nerve. I find them to be annoying. And that's the women from The View. Well, what was interesting is that recently they did actually decide to talk about Cornel West. And I want you to notice something that happens in this discussion. Now, Sunny is going to go into policy in reference to Cornel West. Watch what happens when she brings up policy.
I think that you have to make up straw men. You have to make up a boogeyman underneath the bed when you have no policies, when you have no program, when you have no real vision for this country. You know, people are talking about, oh, Cornel West, I'm biased. He is my friend. And people are saying, you know, he was at Harvard and he was like really, really progressive.
Let's pause there for a second. So Cornel West even knows Sunny. See, that's the thing about Cornel West being in some of these spaces, especially as an academic. He's traveled a lot. He's met a lot of people, and including people like Sunny. And that's the thing, that this actually throws a curveball into this election for mainstream media and for the Democratic Party. Because what do you say in reference to someone like Cornel West, who has already been on CNN and Fox News and all of these stations before he ever ran? He's been on these shows multiple times. He knows people like Sunny. He knows a lot of these people who talk about these elections. Like, what do you say when it's Cornel West? You know, it was easier for them, I think, to smear someone like Jill Stein. A lot of people didn't know who Jill Stein was before she ran. It was easier for them to smear someone like Ralph Nader. It was easier for them to smear someone like anybody running independent, et cetera, that kind of thing. It was easier for them to do that. But when it comes to someone like Cornel West, now you're in a different ballgame, because this is someone who's beloved by so many people because of the work that he's done, not just on the academic side, but the work that he's done in the community. And he's been solid and he stood firm on the issues when it wasn't popular to do so. So this is where it gets tricky. Watch what they do. Let's go back just a little bit here. Particularly Joy, Miss, I support Bernie Sanders. Remember that? I was a Bernie. And then come 2020, she said she was joking. She named her dog Bernie and all that shit. These women are so fake.
Harvard, and he was like really, really progressive. Well, but look at his. Let's finish this. But my point to it is just his platform. He actually has a platform, and it's implementing. But he's going to be wrong.
You see what happens there? Once Sonny says his platform, and she starts to mention the policies, notice how they're quick to interrupt her. Just something I noticed, that's all. Watch. When she starts to mention the policies, watch this.
Actually has a platform, and it's implementing. But he's going to be Congress against Biden. Which is not smart.
You see this? Joy jumps in and goes, but he's going to be running against Biden. Not smart. But he's going to be. See how quick they come in? By the way, these women have. You see these little earpieces, so they get cues from the producers. The producers tell them when to rap. The producers tell them when to stop talking and all that kind of stuff. They're not on their own free will here.
Finish this but my point to it is just his platform. He actually has a platform, and it's implementing. But he's going to be Congress against Biden. Which is not smart. But forgiving all student debt, guaranteeing health care for all, stopping foreign military aid, fighting mass incarceration, ending drilling on public land. Oh, he wants Russia to win in Ukraine. But that's a plan. But Republicans do have limited government. You disagree with it.
And what they're doing right here, Democrat and Republican arguing against each other this way, that is exactly why it's good to have a third party candidate. You see this? See how she jumps in and says, but Republicans have it and she's like, well, he has a plan. Well, the Republicans have it. That's why. See, this is why there's so many more people registering as independents. We don't want anything to do with this. We don't want anything to do with this BS. Sonny is a Democrat. She's a Republican. And then there are some of us somewhere just like, both of you are ridiculous, and neither one of these parties is helping the people. This right here, hallmark moment for you. This is exactly why people are leaving these parties. So let me let them finish.
But Republicans do have limited government. You disagree with it. Can I just finish my thing? Yeah, but as a Republican, I feel like I should be able to say what our plan is. Well, you can. I just wanted to finish what my point was. That's all. And that is simply, you know how I feel about polls.
Notice how Whoopi always comes in to try to change the conversation and to wrap it up and then cut to commercial. They all have their roles. So I'm pretty sure Whoopi got a signal in her ear to come in, interrupt this discussion, and wrap this shit up. Watch.
Do not trust them because they are skewed always to the people who are doing them. And the other thing about Cornel.
Now all of a sudden it's don't trust the polls. But when Joe Biden was doing so well, it was just look at the polls. Now all of a sudden you can't trust the polls, they say.
West, and he's also a friend of mine. I have a great deal of respect for him. But realistically, I'm waiting for someone running for president to say, listen, this is all the stuff I'd like to do, but I know I'm going to have to deal with Congress and Senate and all these other people, so that I may not be able, but this is what I'd like to do. I just want somebody to say what they'd like to say.
And Cornel West has been doing that. Whoopi always comes in at the end of the discussion to make these obvious statements that she wishes people would say that they've already said. She did this to Bernie Sanders. She did this to Andrew Yang. She did this to Marianne Williamson. She did this to Tulsi Gabbard. She always does this. I just wish someone is running, just come in and say, here's what I would like to do. As if nobody has been saying that. Mainstream media. Now that's The View. But then there's also MSNBC. And you have pawns like Simone Sanders and Chuck Todd. They don't want Cornel West or RFK Jr. running either. Look at what they do here, both of them. Watch this.
The call is coming from inside the House. Which House? The House of Representatives. A moderate congressman from Minnesota is calling on his fellow Democrats to primary President Biden, while Representative Dean Phillips hasn't decided if he will challenge President Biden in 2024. He's encouraging others to, quote unquote, jump in to the race.
Now, this guy is corporate, FYI. Those of you not aware of Dean Phillips, he's corporate. He's basically, he wants a moderate. He doesn't want, obviously, anyone to the left or the right. He wants like a moderate person to run. He's a pro-business Democrat. All the clowns. Boy, I tell you.
Here is what Congressman Phillips told my colleague Chuck Todd this morning on Meet the Press.
People want to turn the page. I think that's fair to say. As a Democrat, I adore Joe Biden. He saved this country. He can cement his legacy. My real call to action right now is not about me. The call to action is to ask the president to pass the torch. There is an extraordinary bench of people ready to go, proximate,
who would you like to see in this race?
Problem number one, he said he adores Joe Biden. So there's his kiss up point right there. You know, this is just, boy, I tell you.
I would like to see a moderate governor, hopefully from the heartland, from one of the 4 states that Democrats will need. So this is the time to meet the moment. And I'm doing something that I know it's unpopular as a Democrat, but I'm speaking truth. That's my job, my duty.
So let me pause here for a second. And let me tell you, in other words, what he's really saying. He's saying he doesn't want anything to change. If you come forward and you say that you want like a moderate governor, moderate Democrat governor or whatever to run to be president, then you don't want anything to change. He wants things to stay the way that they are. He just doesn't want Joe Biden to be the one in office that's doing it, because obviously he has issues with Joe Biden, probably the mental capability that we talked about before, but he doesn't want things to change. He probably doesn't really disagree with Joe Biden in reference to policy. He really wants some, again, this is a pro-business Democrat. He just wants someone to come in and make sure that everything's going to stay the same and they're going to maintain the status quo. That's what he wants. A puppet. Now listen to Simone Sanders.
I met the congressman this morning. He's a lovely man, and yet speaking truth is part of his job, but it's also part of mine. So here's how I see it. I just don't think there is a legitimate appetite for another Democratic candidate.
Says who? Do you see what they do? Okay. So you got The View, you got Simone Sanders, you got Chuck Todd. These are the media gatekeepers. There's different types of gatekeeping. These are the media gatekeepers. They're the ones to make sure that everything just stays in place as it is and nothing really changes. Let me go back just a little bit.
Democratic candidate. Look at the polls. A recent New York Times Siena poll actually shows that President Biden's reelection bid is gaining support.
She gives away the problem right here. It's a New York Times poll. The New York Times is pro-Biden. The New York Times is just milk, toast, liberal garbage. That's all it is. That doesn't look like the polls that I've seen. Notice she shows you this poll. She doesn't show you the poll that says how many people don't want him to run again. They all have an agenda. See that? New York Times
shows that President Biden's reelection bid is gaining support among Democrats. And this is not an active primary, folks. President Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee for president.
Listen to to this. Listen to what she says. I don't like this at all. Listen to this.
This is not an active primary, folks. President Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee for president. Other Democrats who have declared themselves candidates in the 2024 presidential primary, I'm talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Marianne Williamson, well, they trail President Biden by more than 50 points in that same poll.
In that same poll. The same poll, that's the New York Times poll, which favors Joe Biden. Do you see the problem here? She said there's no active Democratic primary. This is to mislead people. This is to convince the American people that it's not worth trying to even participate or entertain primary challenges to Joe Biden because Simone Sanders told you it's not even active. This is Simone Sanders pretending like those two people, whether you agree with them or not, aren't actively out campaigning. Meanwhile, Joe Biden was on a beach yesterday while people in Hawaii are pleading for help. So it's just, I don't know how long they're going to continue to try to dupe the American people like this. So let's go on, which RFK Jr., his polling has gone down. I've seen it in multiple polls. So something has to, I don't know what happened there, but it could be the whole Israel-Palestine thing. I don't know.
Well, they trail President Biden by more than 50 points in that same poll. Plucking a moderate governor from a heartland state to run for president might sound like a solid strategy, but at this point in this particular election, doing so without an exploratory committee, a national level campaign apparatus, a plan to get on the ballot in the primary states, or even
when she mentions national level campaign, listen to this. I want to get your take on this, what she says.
A national level campaign.
Without a national level campaign. Joe Biden's not even campaigning. That's just something to take in. He's not even campaigning. He's not doing anything. Can you believe this woman was once a part of Bernie? She was part of Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016. You see how quickly she sold out? Went from Bernie Sanders' campaign to the Joe Biden campaign. And Bernie ran again in 2020 and she went over to Joe Biden. Interesting.
Strategy, but at this point in this particular election, doing so without an exploratory committee, a national level campaign apparatus, a plan to get on the ballot in the primary states, or even an appetite from the people is just simply unrealistic. Hearing the congressman comments today, I just really had to wonder, why weren't these concerns addressed before President Biden announced his reelection campaign?
Now she's just flat out lying. Those concerns were addressed. People have been railing on Joe Biden since the moment he took office. People have been complaining about Joe Biden since the moment he took office. People were saying that someone else should run before Joe Biden announced his reelection. And Simone Sanders knows that. She's just lying. She's paid to lie. This is the same woman who was hoping that she was going to become Joe Biden's press secretary. He looked over her not once, but twice. The first time he assigned Jen Psaki. The second time he assigned Karine Jean-Pierre. So you got looked over twice for the same guy that you keep telling everybody to simp for. She's paid to do this. Paid to do this. You know, Simone Sanders knows Joe Biden ain't done anything for the black community. Come on. But she getting them checks. She making it rain. And that's all she care about. So that's that. Now, there have been some hiccups here and there, and I'm wondering if this is why things are starting to change. Recently, RFK Jr. was asked, I think this is when he's in Iowa, So he was asked this question recently by a reporter in reference to abortion bans. And I think you guys want to hear this because now his campaign has come out and they have retracted what he said and said, well, that's not what he meant to say, that kind of thing. And I'm playing this not to rail on him, but I'm playing this because I think this may play into where we're going in reference to unity between Cornel West and RFK Jr. in the first place. There was the policing comment, which JB reported on the other day. I think it was Sunday. JB talked about that on RBN. And now there's the abortion comment. I told you the closer we get to 2024, more and more attacks are going to come. So should the people who are constantly getting attacked by mainstream media, should those people join forces? Listen to this.
Would you sign a federal protection to protect the rights that were in the Roe precedent if you were president?
I believe that a decision to abort a child should be up to the women during the first 3 months of life.
So you would cap it at 15 weeks?
Yes.
Or 21 weeks?
Sorry, let me wind this back. His voice,
Would you sign
I got
a
it.
federal
Okay.
protection to protect the rights that were in the Roe precedent if you were president?
I believe that a decision to abort a child should be up to the women during the first 3 months of life.
So you would cap it at 15 weeks?
Yes.
Or 21
Yes.
weeks?
Yeah, for 3 months.
So 3 months. You would sign a federal cap on that?
Yes, I would.
Okay. So not unlimited access to abortion, as many in the Democratic Party.
I think the states, once a child is viable outside the womb, I think then the state has an interest in protecting that child. That supersedes, and I think that the state has an interest at every level, but at some point, I'm for medical freedom. I think individuals ought to be able to make their own choices.
Which is why I'm surprised to hear you say you'd cap it.
Well, because...
So let me pause here for a second to explain what's going on. So she was asking him if he would cap abortion at 15 weeks, and he said yes. And then he goes on to say that obviously he's for medical freedom, that type of thing. So now she's saying, well, I'm surprised why you're saying that you would cap it. So let me just explain that and let it continue.
I think at some point you'd say the state, I would personally not. I think the states have a right to protect a child once the child becomes viable. That right increases, and I think there's very, very few abortions that are performed after that period of time anyway. Most abortions are performed during the first 3 months of life, and I think that's when I feel I fought harder than anybody in this country for medical freedom.
Okay. So as you can imagine, RFK Jr. has received a lot of criticism for that comment, but his campaign did send out a message basically saying that he retracts that. I thought I had that up here. I'm sorry. I'll find it later. But that he was retracting that was not what he meant when he answered the question that way, that he supports a woman's right to choose. So I want to make sure I put that part in there. But then there was another one. There was also the policing question. Now, this is in South Carolina, in Charleston, South Carolina. And I've lived in South Carolina, went to college in South Carolina. And I don't understand where he went wrong on this question either, because for me, it's like, considering what has happened in Charleston, South Carolina, why would you oppose removing qualified immunity? So he's getting a lot of heat for this one too. And stay with me. I swear this is all connected.
On your website, you said you want to remove qualified immunity and transform the police. What does that look like for you to transform the police?
Yeah, I don't, if it says on my website that we're going to remove qualified immunity, that's wrong.
So that part right there, some people are, thank you, Eric. Some people are not happy about hearing that. So apparently his website says one thing, that they would remove qualified immunity in reference to policing. But in this interview, he said, if that's what's on the website, that's wrong. So some people are just kind of like, well, what else is wrong or incorrect on your website? And for me, and I'll tell you right now, For the people who were in Charleston, South Carolina, and remember the police officers chasing down a black man and shooting him in the back, and he had no weapon. And for the people who remember, particularly in Charleston, South Carolina, how the police treated someone like Dylan Roof when he walked into that church and he killed all those black people, how they just handcuffed him and took him to get food afterwards. For him to be in Charleston, of all places, and to say that he doesn't think qualified immunity should be removed. Yikes. And these are just some things I think he just don't think about. Like, I think there's some things is like, how can I put this? The way people come at me is like this, right? People say, well, Sabby, some people are one issue voter, single issue voter. I totally get that. And for those people on an issue like this, that could be a no for them. If your single issue is policing, this might be a no for you. If your single issue is abortion, this might be a no for you. If your single issue is Israel-Palestine foreign policy, he might be a no for you. So when we talk about some people are single issue voters, I totally get that and totally understand that. But what single issue are we talking about? So let me let this finish.
On your website, it says transform the police. In an interview, you said you wanted to remove.
Yeah, I don't. That is an error. We do not. I do not want to. I don't think it's feasible to remove qualified immunity.
Okay.
I think the police are having a hard enough time hiring people right now, and that a lot of interactions that the police have nothing to do with civil rights or race, and we can't put each individual police.
That is a huge no. Again, think about where he is. This is Charleston, South Carolina. A lot of the interactions with police have nothing to do with race. Bullshit. Is RFK Jr. talking to black people in Charleston about this issue? About how they're stopped by the police for no reason? How police just shoot unarmed black people in the back, but they handcuff the white guy who shoots up all these people in this church? For RFK Jr. to sit here during this interview and knowing where he is at that point in time, I feel like, again, it's like reading the room, feeling the optics, knowing where you are. The environment is especially important. Most people, I think, would have lied. And I'm not saying he should lie, but I don't think he understands. I don't really think he gets this issue. That you can't just come there and say, well, no, it's not racial. Really, Bobby? Not for you? Not for you? How many black people he having this conversation with? How many? Even the reporter is white. Let me let it finish.
Police officers in a position where anybody who has an interaction with them can then sue them individually. And
so you don't have any plans in place to remove qualified immunity?
No, I'm not going to remove qualified immunity, but I'm going to use the Justice Department to address any abuse of the use, particularly of deadly force, in interactions between black Americans and police or anybody else. So, and I think that that's a civil rights issue that has to be addressed, and I'm going to address it aggressively.
But if it's a civil rights issue that needs to be addressed, then why did you say before that race has nothing to do with it? So there have been some missteps here. The website says one thing. What he said in this interview is different. That's a big thing. If your website says that you will remove qualified immunity and you are not for that, I don't know what happened there. I don't know what happened. But that being said, he got a lot of pushback from people in reference to that too. I'll go ahead and put up the other one, Eric, whenever you're ready. And then I'll go to the statement that he made in reference to Cornel West, because I want to show you guys, I wanted to show you all of this first so you can see why I think he's saying what he said. So here's him walking back the abortion comment. RFK Jr.'s campaign tries to walk back his support of 3-month federal abortion ban. So this went out pretty quickly after that interview. And it says here, Mr. Kennedy's position on abortion is that it is always the woman's right to choose. He does not support legislation banning abortion. The campaign said in a statement attempting to clarify remarks Kennedy made to an NBC reporter at the Iowa State Fair that he had prompted praise from a major anti-abortion rights group. So they issued this statement after that interview. Now, all of that being said, everything that I just showed you, if you combine the two together, that makes me wonder, because of all those things, is this the reason why RFK Jr. put out this statement? Cornel West is a truth teller. I'm glad he's part of the presidential race because he's a thoughtful, brave, compassionate, and honest person who sees how devastating America's forever wars have been to this country and the world, and who understands how corrupt corporate influence has hijacked our government and both political parties, especially the Democratic Party elites. And he goes on to say here, Dr. West brings civility, decency, and respect into politics, qualities sadly lacking in today's political culture. His candidacy can help raise the level of political discourse in this country. Hashtag Kennedy 24. So what was that all about? This was August 13th, 9:55 a.m. What was this all about? What was that for? Why is this all this praise for Cornel West all of a sudden? And yes, they've both been attacked. But I just find this interesting considering after those two mishaps that just happened. Where is this coming from? And so I saw that and I thought to myself, is it possible that he could be considering, if he doesn't win the Democratic primary, which he won't, I'm just keeping it real, is it possible that he may be considering a third party or independent run? And if that is the case, and we'll go ahead and bring up the poll whenever you're ready, Eric. If that's the case, and he is considering that, I don't think he would come out and say it if he is, but he is considering that. Do you think there could be a ticket with RFK Jr. and Cornel West? Obviously, given he would have to change his position on Israel and Palestine, that would be a big one. Obviously, I don't think Cornel West would run with somebody who feels that way about the position that RFK Jr. does. But do you think that a unity ticket could be possible? I haven't seen this poll since I went live, so I'm curious. Let's see. Okay. We have over 1,300 votes. If RFK Jr. loses the primary, should Cornel West and RFK Jr. run together as Greens? This is a close poll. I've never had a poll this close, I think. 48% said yes, 34% of you said no, and 18% of you said not sure. That is interesting. I should screenshot that and that's interesting. Well, Dr. West will be back next week, so I'll get to talk to him about more of this. But that is interesting. I just don't know where that came from all of a sudden. So that made me think a little bit. James says YouTube is suggesting on autoplay The Blind Side, buy or rent. Of course. Of course they are. Z Manny, Sabby, good point. West has some big advantages. RE, this media obstacle, he has better exposure. Dems will try to drive Greens off the ballot to prevent people from voting for him. Bingos. Ravina, Cornel West said that he's running to destroy the system, not to work inside it. Leroy, shout out to Leroy for being a member for 24 months. Holy wows. Leroy been with me for a long time. A lot of you are newbies. Leroy's been around for a long time. Says, I detest Whoopi. She gets paid by the migraine medication company Nurtec ODT, and she's part of the problem why we have migraines. That's a good one. Thank you for the super chat, Rodrigo. RFK off the record said he will not run third party. If it's off the record, how do you guys know? Thank you, Alex Fox. You break things down better than anyone. I learned a lot here. Thanks, Sabby. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Janice. RFK switching depending on his audience. He was for repealing qualified immunity when talking to Black reporters, then backtracked. He has no principled positions. And if that's the case, Janice, that's a problem. That's something Cornel West mentioned in that interview he had with Stephen A. He said, like, some candidates are just switching their position based on who they're talking to. That's not principled. So if that's the case, that's something people need to pay attention to. Anywho, time to head out, guys. I went over my time. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. I'm off tomorrow. I'm not here on Wednesdays. Some of you know how that goes, but I'll upload clips. Other than that, time to peace out, honey buns. All right, you know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.